Chapter 642. Yang Qindong didn't want to make things difficult for them. Ding Shan received the order and went to Narcissus town 20 miles away. He reported his name and said he wanted to meet the general of the Nuzan division, Borte. He didn't mention Yang Qindong and the mercenaries' names because this place was ill-informed and didn't know what they were talking about. This time, Ding Shan reported that he was from the Red Banner Army. The Red Banner Army had some influence in the Nuergan Dusi region. The Nuzan cavalry reported Ding Shan's identity to the general. Borte was currently in a large house with two of his generals. They were discussing how to deal with the Mongol general, Bagan. During this period of time, Bagan had started to recruit soldiers again. He had actually attracted the attention of most of the young men in the town by offering them 5 taels of silver and 20 kilograms of meat for a month's service. It was said that many people had already signed up. Once Bagan's influence expanded, he would become a threat to Borte. This was something he didn't want to see. Moreover, Bagan had already broken the rules. According to the agreement, no matter who it was, they could recruit, but the standard of treatment was the same. 2 taels of silver and 5 kilograms of meat a month. Under the same standard, the townspeople could join whichever side they wanted. That being said, the Nuzan division had 4,000 cavalry while the Mongols only had 2,500. With this comparison, the people who wanted to join the army naturally knew which side to choose. Choosing the strong over the weak, this was the mentality of most people. In this way, the so-called fairness did not exist. This made Borte stronger and stronger, and Bagan weaker and weaker. Left with no choice, Bagan could only break the rules. He was willing to pay more just to attract more people to join his cavalry. A burly man was sitting to the left of Borte. After hearing the general's words, he slammed the table and said with an irritable tone, "Bagan is breaking the rules. Since that's the case, I suggest we send troops to beat him up and let him know who has the final say in Narcissus town." "General Hulu, please calm down." Borte wasn't angry when he saw how impatient his subordinates were. Instead, he was secretly happy. He liked people like Hulu, who was straightforward and didn't hide anything. When he used such people, he felt more assured. General Hulu had already expressed his opinion. Borte's gaze fell on the man on his right. This man's name was Hui Libu, and his thoughts were clearly much deeper. Hui Libu didn't immediately express his decision. Instead, he pondered for a moment and said, "Of course we don't care about Bagan. We have 4,000 cavalrymen. As long as we attack, they won't be able to hold on for long. They will be defeated in the end. But don't forget, behind them is the powerful Mongol Empire. Although their territory is far from here, once the news spreads out, who can guarantee that they won't have any ideas about us? If a group of 5,000 Mongol cavalry comes, how are we going to deal with them? If we fight, can we win?" This. Hulu originally wanted to say something, but after hearing this, he had no choice but to shut his mouth. Borte let out a long sigh in his heart. The Mongol Empire was too powerful. They were so powerful that he had to think carefully before doing anything to Bagan. If the terrifying consequences were to come, he wouldn't be able to bear it. In his heart, he wanted to use Narcissus town to develop and strengthen himself, and not attract other people to attack him. In order to achieve this goal, he didn't even forcefully recruit soldiers in the town because he knew that there would be spies from the Baiming army here. Currently, he only had 4,000 cavalrymen, so the Baiming army wouldn't see him as a threat. However, if he recruited all the men in the town, then his power would instantly increase by several times. This would naturally attract the attention of the Baiming army. When that time comes, if the Baiming army sent an army to surround him, then he wouldn't even be able to survive. "Sai, if that's the case, are we just going to watch Bagan grow stronger and stronger until he becomes a threat to us?" Borte sighed and said in a dissatisfied tone, "This. Perhaps we can send someone to discuss with Bagan. After all, it's not like we can't make the same offer. At worst we can do the same. I'm sure the men in the town will still choose to join us," General Hui Libu said in a testing manner. Although due to the environment, they didn't have a lot of money, but it wasn't like they didn't have any. If they were really desperate, they could make the same offer. At worst, both sides would suffer losses. "Looks like we have no choice but to do as he said." Borte nodded. This was the result he had expected. However, this way, the amount of money he had would shrink by a lot. If this continued, without enough income, He might not even be able to afford military expenses one day. Just as Borte nodded and made his decision, a soldier walked in from outside and knelt on the ground. "General, there is someone who claims to be from the 5-Star Army who wants to see you." The 5-Star Army. Borte wasn't unfamiliar with this name. He knew that this was an army of thousands of cavalrymen, and that they had some fighting power. However, that was all. After all, he was 3 times stronger than them. Yes. Did the person say what he wanted? No. The person who came called himself Ding Shan. He said he had business to discuss with you. As for what business, he didn't dare to tell us. The soldier knelt on the ground and answered truthfully. Business? He then let him in. Borte smiled. This was a normal thing to do. This was because they could get green mouse fur, as well as things that were urgently needed outside like gerfalcon and pearls. For this reason, it wasn't strange for ordinary merchants to contact him. However, these merchants would usually appear in early spring and late autumn. It was already summer, and there weren't many merchants who still wanted to discuss business with him. With curious gazes, Hu Lu and General Hui Libu didn't move at all. They were also curious about what business this Ding Shan from the Red Banner wanted to discuss with them. The personal guard left and quickly returned. Behind him was Ding Shan, who had a smile on his face. When this person entered the room, he very humbly cupped his fist and greeted Borte and the other 2. Ding Shan greets the 3 generals. Greetings to the 3 generals. Yes. Are you Ding Shan from the 5-Star Army? May I ask what position you hold there? Hui Libu took the initiative to ask. He also played the role of the vanguard. He couldn't let the general personally deal with the trivial matters. This lowly one's talent is limited. I am only a company commander. Ding Shan still had a smile on his face. It was indescribable sincerity. Company commander? Hui Libu frowned. He clearly hadn't heard of this position before. Company commander? How many men does Brother Ding Shan have under his command? Oh, only 100. Ding Shan was still smiling as he spoke. He didn't have the slightest self-deprecation because he could only lead 100 men. 100? He. When Borte and the other 2 heard that the other party was only a centurion, they couldn't help but laugh. Wasn't the position of company commander supposed to be a very prestigious one? They didn't think that he was only a centurion. Right, Ding Shan must have known that he was embarrassed to say it out loud because of his position. That's why he purposely said that he was a company commander. In the end, the 3 of them still saw through his identity. Sigh, who knew what the 5-Star Army was thinking? They actually only sent a centurion to meet him. Were they looking down on him? Borte and the other 2 seemed to have thought of something. A trace of anger appeared on their faces. When Ding Shan saw this, he naturally knew that their hearts had changed. He sighed in his heart. You don't know how powerful the 5-Star Army is. Sending me here is already giving you enough face. Of course, he couldn't say these words. Even if he said it, no one would believe him. Thinking about his mission, he put away his original smile and said as seriously as possible, 3 generals, this time I actually came here to make a deal with you. I think that in front of benefits, my identity shouldn't be important. Yes. Hui couldn't hold back his anger. You said a deal, then tell us the content and amount of the deal. They didn't immediately refuse because they wanted to wait for Ding Shan to finish speaking before humiliating him. After all, he was only a centurion. They didn't think that he could take out anything to tempt them. Ignoring the other party's somewhat cold attitude, Ding Shan finally opened his mouth. 3 generals, the 5-Star Army came here to buy war horses. We know that your noble family has a lot of war horses. Since they are eating for free, why not sell them to us? Isn't that the best of both worlds? Buy horses? You want to buy war horses? Hui still didn't say anything. Then he laughed and said, Ding. Company commander, right? How many horses do you want? What price can you pay? He purposely emphasized the word few to mock Ding Shan. With his identity as a mere centurion, what could he do? Even if he wanted to buy war horses, he would only buy a few. Although the war horses were the main source of income for the Nuzan tribe, if it was only a few, they wouldn't put it in their eyes. A few? Ding Shan mocked the other party in his heart. Then, his tone changed into a very arrogant one. He had thought about it. Who said that merchants had to lower their heads? That was a small merchant. He was a big merchant. Since he was a big merchant, he didn't have to look at other people's faces. It was others who had to look at his mood. Ding Shan's tone also changed. At this moment, it was as if he was a different person. 3 generals. You must be mistaken. The 5-star army doesn't want a few horses. We can buy as many as you have. As for the price, it can be discussed. Chapter 643. Originally, she didn't care. If it wasn't for the fact that she didn't want to make enemies, she would have already kicked Ding Shan out of here. Ding Shan was just a small force with only 1,000 soldiers. She wasn't afraid of him. But all of this changed with Ding Shan's words. As if he thought he didn't hear it clearly, Borte asked, "Wait a minute, what did Company Commander Ding say?" Seeing that even Borte was shocked by him, Ding Shan's sense of superiority immediately increased. Thinking that a big shop can bully customers, but at the same time, a big customer can also bully the shop. He regained his previous smile and said, "I said that there is no limit to the number of warhorses you can buy. We will buy as many as you can provide. The price will also satisfy you." Hiss. This time they heard it clearly, but because of this, Borte and the other 2 sucked in a breath of cold air. They didn't expect the 5-star army to be such a big customer. They also didn't expect them to be so rich. Borte was just worried that he didn't have enough money to face the Mongol army. He didn't expect that the heavens would send him a god of wealth so quickly. Borte, who didn't care about the other party before, immediately smiled. "Haha, come, prepare a seat for Company Commander Ding." Just a moment ago, Ding Shan had been standing in the middle of the hall, surrounded by Borte and the other 2. It was as if he was being interrogated by the 3 judges. Now that he heard that the other party was strong, his attitude immediately changed. This was the effect of strength. Immediately, a bodyguard entered the main hall and brought over a long table. A blanket was prepared for them to sit on. Ding Shan didn't regard himself as an outsider. He cupped his hands and smiled to express his gratitude. Then, he sat down at the long table and casually picked up a bowl of wine on the table and poured it into his mouth. Then he praised the wine. Ding Shan purposely displayed a heroic appearance, and even when he drank, he downed a bowl in one gulp. This instantly attracted the goodwill of Borte and the other 2, especially Hu Lu. He was originally a straightforward person, and when he drank, he naturally liked to drink to his heart's content. Seeing that Ding Shan seemed to be a kindred spirit, he laughed heartily and revealed a sincere smile, drinking a bowl of wine with him from afar. After drinking 2 bowls of wine in a row, Ding Shan's expression didn't change, nor did his heart beat wildly. He looked at Borte, who was sitting at the head of the table, and said with a smile, "General, can we discuss the price and the number of war horses?" "Okay. Now that Company Commander Ding has taken the initiative to come here, you can name the price," Borte said with a smile, looking like an old fox. The other party wanted to listen to his opinion. This was a matter of planning before taking action. Ding Shan did not have any objections to this. After all, this was the other party's territory. Of course, he would let the other party have the final say. "Okay, since the general has spoken, then this little one will name the price. For a batch of good quality warhorses, we offer 120 taels. This is already the highest price in the market. As long as the warhorses arrive, we will pay the money. It's only a few 100,000 taels of silver. Our 5-star army doesn't have anything else, but we have a lot of money." Ha! Ding Shan was very confident. Borte and the other 2 also believed in this point. If the other party didn't prepare enough money, then what right did they have to talk about cooperation? Besides, if they didn't have enough money, then weren't they afraid that they would flip out? One must know that this was the Jurchen's territory. Moreover, their military strength was several times greater than the other parties. No one would take the initiative to provoke such a powerful existence. As for the price of 120 taels of silver for a horse, this was indeed very fair. In the market, ordinary horses were usually sold for around 30 taels of silver. War horses were usually sold for 100 to 120 taels of silver. Very few excellent horses could be sold for a sky-high price of 150 taels of silver. However, that was referring to the price of delivery. This time, the other party had taken the initiative to come to Narcissus town. Therefore, they only needed to hand over the goods to the other party. Just this alone would save them a lot of transportation costs and risks. From this point of view, 120 taels of silver was indeed tempting. However, in this world, who wouldn't want more money? Since this was a business that was delivered to his doorstep, and Ding Shan looked like he was determined to get it, Borte naturally had no reason to let it go easily. Therefore, even though his heart skipped a beat when he heard the price of 120 taels of silver for a warhorse, he did not show it on the surface. He shook his head and said, "The price is too low." Ding Shan had naturally thought deeply before offering 120 taels of silver for a horse. Yes, Zhang Mingji had indeed seen the price of one warhorse at 200 taels of silver. However, the other party had no intention of doing business with him. They were prepared to rob him. The facts proved this point. After finding Zhang Mingji's corpse in Hornhill Call, they did not find any large amount of money on him or in the group. This time, Ding Shan really wanted to make a deal with him. However, the other party still thought that the price was too low. This was a bit insatiable. Ding Shan argued with reason. "General Borte, we are here to buy from you. You only need to send the warhorses out of Narcissus Town and our deal will be considered complete. This will save you a lot of trouble." "I said the price is too low." Borte had no intention of reasoning with Ding Shan. He still held on to his previous idea and repeated it. Ding Shan really wanted to leave in a huff. He could see Borte's greed. However, when he remembered that the sixth young master was waiting for his news outside the town, he had to forcefully suppress the thought of leaving. He then looked at Borte and said, "General, how much do you think is appropriate?" 150 taels of silver for one. We can guarantee the quality of the warhorses. If you don't like any of them, you can return them to us," Borte said proudly, as if the warhorses of the Nuzan were the best. This warhorse was equivalent to an extra 30 taels of silver. In this way, if they bought 4 warhorses, they would lose 1 warhorse. It was a bit of a loss. However, before coming here, the sixth young master had said that as long as the warhorses were of good quality, it did not matter if they had to pay a little more. What the mercenaries lacked now was warhorses. They could not afford to delay important matters because of a little money. Thinking of this, Ding Shan finally gritted his teeth and agreed. "All right, since that is the case, I agree to this price. However, I do not know how many warhorses the general can sell so that I can go back and prepare the money." Ding Shan actually agreed? He thought that in the face of such an exorbitant demand, the other party would definitely hesitate. Even if he got up and left now, it would be normal for him to come back a few days later. Even if he had to settle it today, he would have raised the price. For example, 130 taels of silver or 140 taels of silver would have been fine. However, the other party did not say anything and just agreed. This was indeed out of Borte and the other two's expectations. However, at the same time, they were overjoyed. If one warhorse could be sold for an extra 30 taels of silver, they would be able to make a lot more money. With this money, wouldn't they be able to compete with the Mongol army on the issue of new recruits? Haha, good. Company Commander Ding is indeed a straightforward person. Since that is the case, this general will also be a little more generous. I will sell you 1,000 warhorses for 150 taels of silver each. Borte laughed loudly, as if he was afraid that Ding Shan would go back on his words. He quickly settled the matter. 1,000 warhorses. This number was not low. Perhaps the Nuzan might have some extra, but the quality was good. It was not easy to get so many warhorses. This was also what made Ding Shan satisfied. All right, the total is 150,000 taels of silver. I will bring the money to trade in 2 days. All right, 2 days it is. Borte also agreed to this decision. Then, both sides looked at each other and laughed. After the business was finished, Borte originally wanted to ask Ding Shan to stay for a meal, but the other party said that he had something else to do and refused. After leaving the Nuzan's camp, he went to the Mongol camp. Very quickly, he also finished the business of 1,000 warhorses. The only difference was that the other party accepted the price of 120 taels of silver each. Ding Shan's actions naturally did not escape Borte's eyes. When he knew that this person had gone to the Mongol camp to do business, his expression became somewhat ugly. He originally thought that with this amount of money, he would be able to compete with the Mongol Bagan. However, The other party also sold 1,000 war horses. Although the price was lower than his, it was impossible for him to increase the gap between them. This made him somewhat discouraged. However, at the same time, he was also interested in Ding Shan and the 5-star army. This team was really rich. They were willing to spend 200,000 to 300,000 taels of silver without even blinking. This made him feel a great deal of envy and jealousy. General, I have already arranged for people to follow Ding Shan. I believe that the information regarding the 5-star army will be sent back soon. Hui Libu seemed to have seen through Borte's thoughts and took the initiative to add this sentence. Very good. Then let's wait and see how strong this 5-star army is. Humph. Don't show off your wealth. If you don't have enough strength and still dare to show off like this, then you are not doing business. You are seeking death. At this moment, Borte's ambition had already begun to swell. He was eyeing the large amount of money in the hands of the 5-star army. After Ding Shan finished the business with the Nuzan and the Mongol, he left Narcissus town and walked towards the mercenary camp 20 li away. He was the commander of a company under the direct command of the regiment. Normally, he would be a scout and scout. Naturally, he had already discovered that there was someone following him. However, he did not care. If it was in the past, he would have been more careful. Now that the 6th young master was here, their strength had increased greatly. What was there to be afraid of? Ding Shan quickly rode back to the camp. Behind him, the scout sent by General Hui Libu looked around the mercenary camp. After seeing the general situation, he also left. Not long after, the information regarding the mercenary camp was passed to Borte and Hui Libu. Chapter 644. 3,000 cavalrymen, 2,000 infantrymen, and many horses were used to transport goods? Borte and Hui Li looked at each other after hearing the report from their spies. This was different from what they knew about the 5-star army, which only had a little over 1,000 cavalrymen. Of course, if they knew that Yang Qindong had originally planned to equip all the soldiers with war horses, it would be best if each soldier had 2. However, due to the limited number of war horses, the 3 cold vanguard regiments and 2 auxiliary battalions were converted into a cavalry regiment. The remaining horses were not suitable to be war horses and could only be used to transport goods. If that was the case, they wouldn't be interested in the 5-star army. This force should be the 5-star army's newly expanded force. They shouldn't have much combat power. If we can catch them off guard, we can definitely defeat them. Not only that, we can also obtain their money, war horses, and even their soldiers. When that happens, our forces will almost double. When we face Bagan, the pressure will be much greater. Hui Li muttered to himself for a moment before becoming excited. The greater the difficulty, the greater the result. Hui Li's words coincided with Borte's thoughts. He immediately made up his mind and said with a ferocious expression, "All right, we should also make some preparations. How about this? Mobilize the cavalrymen. In 2 days, we will use the trade as an excuse to take over the enemy." In the mercenary camp 20 miles away from Narcissus town, Ding Shan reported the details of his trip to Yang Qindong and the other battalion commanders. When they heard that Borte had offered 150 silvers for a war horse, many of the officers were enraged. It was obvious that they were angry at Borte's exorbitant demand. He was clearly treating them like fat sheep to be slaughtered. Yang Qindong didn't feel much about it. It was just an extra 30,000 silvers. He really didn't care about it. However, he had seen and remembered Qi Taiying's greed. Once he had the chance, he would definitely repay Qi Taiying for what he had done today. Yang Qindong only wanted to settle this matter first. He didn't want to immediately become enemies with Borte. Borte's strength wasn't weak. Unless they used firearms, they wouldn't be able to take advantage of him. Besides, even if it was just because of 30,000 taels of silver, there was no need to start a war. This excuse was not enough. However, no one expected that an excuse would appear so quickly. Su Yunxing, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion, appeared in the large tent and delivered the news he had just received from Narcissus town to Yang Qindong and the other officers. 6th young master, Nuren is making a move. Our people spent a lot of money to get in touch with some of the Nuzan's cavalry. We just got the news from their mouths. In 2 days, they will be moving out in full armor. As for who the target is, the higher-ups didn't say. As soon as Su Yunxing entered the tent, he reported the first-hand information that the scouts had received. Armor was usually only worn during military operations. After all, the heavy armor wasn't very comfortable to wear. The operation would take place 2 days later. It was probably very clear who the target was. No one would believe that the Nuzin would have other military plans 2 days later. Ha ha ha. Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh when he heard the news. He had indeed come to Narcissus Town to buy a horse. This place was quite far from Baiming's garrison. Not only would there be fewer restrictions on buying a horse here, it wouldn't attract too much attention either. At the same time, he also wanted to see the Nuzin's strength. However, he really didn't want to start a war here. It wasn't worth it. However, if others took the initiative to provoke him, then the situation would be completely different. Were mercenaries afraid of trouble? Obviously, they weren't. As long as they were angered, no matter how strong the opponent was or what they looked like, there was only one word: fight. Now, Yang Chendong had the elite Cold Vanguard 3rd Regiment in his hands. Reality proved that although the Wind Chaser Cavalry Regiment wasn't the strongest and wasn't at the level of a first-class regiment, it was still possible for them to become a first-class regiment. If the Nuzin still dared to target him with such a strong army, it could only mean one thing. The other party's appetite was too big and too greedy. It was no wonder that in history, they had the idea of targeting the great Ming dynasty more than 100 years later. This was their nature and it wouldn't be easy to change. It was a pity that they had provoked mercenaries this time. Yang Qindong wasn't going to be polite to them. With the number of cavalry he had, he might have to pay a high price to attack the other party. However, if he had to defend himself, it would be much easier. When Yang Qindong laughed, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who knew him better, also laughed. This was the 6th young master's signature move. This kind of laughter showed that the 6th young master was angry. The consequence of being angry was definitely going to be a big battle. Both of them loved to fight, so they were naturally happy. Come, everyone, don't leave. Let's discuss the military battle plan in 2 days. Yang Qindong took the initiative to walk to the sand table and looked at his position. The Nuzin suddenly made a move. As one of their opponents, she naturally couldn't escape the eyes of the Mongol army. Both sides relied on Narcissus Town. The Nuzin and the Mongol army had long been in each other's shoes. It was very difficult for either side to do something behind the other's back. Therefore, in terms of news, Bagan received it much earlier than Yang Qindong. His general, Taimu was in charge of recruiting new soldiers when he was urgently called to the barracks by Bagan. He was informed of what might happen in 2 days. General, is Borte planning to attack the 5-star army? Although Taimu was tall, he wasn't stupid. He quickly thought of a possibility. That should be the case. Otherwise, do you think they would dare to attack our army? Bagan said proudly. Although he wasn't as strong as the Nuzin in terms of military strength, he was a Mongol. The Mongol cavalry had once been invincible. Even now, although it had declined, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. It wasn't something that just anyone could provoke. The Baiming army might have the guts, but the Nuzin soldiers led by Borte definitely wouldn't. Since they couldn't attack them, they could only attack the 5-star army that had just arrived. When Ding Shan appeared here today, he looked like a child of wealth. It was no wonder that Borte and the others would have such thoughts. Taimu found out from Bagan that Ding Shan wanted to buy 1,000 war horses. He couldn't help but worry. General, it seems like the 5-star army is very rich. However, the more it is so, the more we can't let them succeed. Otherwise, once they obtain the 5-star army's resources, their strength will become unstoppable. The gap between our two sides will only widen. This will be disadvantageous in the future. That's right. Bagan nodded heavily. This was the reason why he called Taimu over. General, what do you plan to do? Taimu knew that since Bagan had made his intentions clear, he must have thought of a countermeasure. However, he didn't know what to do next. Bagan didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be hesitating as well. After a few breaths he said, "We have 3 options now. First, we take the initiative to look for Borte. Since there are benefits, we naturally can't let them take it all for themselves. We can work together to eliminate the 5-star army and share the benefits. Second, we can work together with the 5-star army and fight Borte together. This way, we can achieve our goal of severely injuring him. From then on, we will become the strongest force in Narcissus town.
Third, we can secretly inform the 5-star army of Borte's intention to attack and wait until both sides are heavily injured before we suddenly attack and reap the benefits.
There were 3 options to choose from. At this moment, Taimur was silent. He was considering the feasibility of the 3 options in his mind. The first option didn't seem to make sense. They could obviously take all the benefits for themselves. Why would the Nuzan share the benefits with them? At least if it were them, they definitely wouldn't be willing to share the benefits with others. As for the second option, although it might severely injure the Nuzan, the benefits would be very limited. Without money, they wouldn't be able to expand. If Narcissus town didn't have a strong force, it would only attract the attention of the Beiming army. It might even cause them to send troops to deal with Narcissus town. On the other hand, there was only the third option. If it went well, not only would they be able to get rid of Borte, but they would also be able to obtain enough money from the 5-star army to develop themselves. As long as they had money, they would be able to attract more people to join them. Once their force grew, it would be much more difficult for the Beiming army to deal with them. This was the only way for them to develop and survive. The third option. Taimur made his decision after weighing the options in his mind. Very good. Bagan laughed and nodded. It was obvious that he was leaning towards the third option. Now that he had reached an agreement with Taimur, they could go and make preparations. They were like the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Not long after the 2 generals reached an agreement, a Mongolian scout quietly left Narcissus town and went to the mercenary camp 20 miles away. He passed on the news that Borte might deal with them in 2 days. In the tent, Tiger's Mane politely sent the Mongolian scout away. He then returned and stood beside Yang Chendong. Young master, you've guessed correctly. It seems that the Mongolian army has a lot of ideas. Haha, this is a world where the strong prey on the weak. It's normal for them to have a lot of ideas. The key is still strength. Without enough strength, even if you're smart, you can only protect yourself. Yang Chendong maintained a confident smile on his face.
He had said before that it was impossible for the Mongolian army to not interfere in such an important matter. Not long after he said that, they indeed made their move.
Chapter 645. If you want to take advantage of us, then you should be prepared to be swallowed by us. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with wisdom. If the Mongol army did not have any intentions of attacking them, he would not spend so much effort to deal with them. However, since they had such thoughts, he could only give them a taste of their own medicine. What Mongol background? This might be able to scare the Nuzan, but it was not enough to enter Yang Chendong's eyes at all. If they made him unhappy, he could also deal a heavy blow to the Mongol army. As long as General Bagan wanted to deal with him, the mercenaries would not hold back in the slightest. In this regard, Yang Chendong had already made preparations. 2 days was more than enough for him to complete his plan. The Nuzan cavalry was actively making preparations. It was not that Borte did not think that the 5-star army would resist, but in his opinion, the Nuzan cavalry was the strongest cavalry in the world. If they really fought, even the Mongol cavalry would not be their match. There was no way they would lose this battle. If they succeeded in their surprise attack, the battle would be over in less than 2 hours. On the other hand, the problem was Bagan's 2,500 cavalry. If this person interfered, it would be troublesome. As a precaution, Borte purposely left General Hui Libu behind and gave him 1,000 cavalrymen to keep an eye on Bagan. Once Bagan made a move, he was to restrain him. Although they didn't have the advantage in numbers, they didn't intend to severely injure Bagan. As long as they could keep Bagan in the vicinity of the town, they could wait until the 5-star army was completely annihilated. Bagan would then tactfully become obedient. As a result, they only sent 3,000 cavalry to fight the mercenaries. Hulu was the vanguard, while Borte led the middle. Regarding this, Yang Chendong was not very clear. After all, the scouts he sent out only knew that the Nuzan cavalry had a mission. As for what the mission was, they would not know until the morning of the day after tomorrow. But whether it was 3,000 or 4,000 enemies, Yang Chendong wasn't afraid. It was just a defensive battle. Even if Borte and Bagan joined hands, he wouldn't be afraid. Time passed bit by bit. On the surface, the 5-star army did not make any movements during the day,
and seemed to be waiting for the transaction 2 days later. However, as soon as night fell, the army began to get busy. Ding Shan's direct cavalry regiment was also responsible for the role of sentry posts. They would chase away the Nuzan cavalry who were responsible for scouting until the sun came up, and they would only let them in again after daybreak. This practice did not arouse the suspicion of others. After all, everyone was afraid of being attacked at night. For the sake of safety, the vigilance at night was stricter than during the day. This was understandable. Therefore, this matter was only reported to Borte symbolically. Nobody paid any attention to it. They were completely unaware that a large number of mines had been quietly buried in the front of the mercenary camp. A portion of these mines had been modified by Crimson City's ordnance stones in the later stages. They were called passive detonation mines, or passive mines. These mines weren't very powerful, but they could be used to deal with cavalry. They played a role in disrupting the morale of the troops. The biggest difference between passive mines and active mines was that the latter would explode when stepped on, while the former required a long rope to detonate. This could greatly ensure that the mines wouldn't hurt their own people. This was the new technology of the time. For example, the Great Ming Dynasty had already had mines. They buried a type of gun underground. When stepped on, it would detonate. The lethality wasn't very high, but it was enough to give people a headache. The appearance of passive landmines had indeed greatly improved this technology, ensuring that mercenaries could continue to advance in this era. In the future, as they continued to develop, remote-controlled landmines would also appear, which would greatly increase the distance of detonation. That would be the true power of this technology. While burying the mines at night was one thing, cavalry soldiers were also quietly sent out. They left the camp and disappeared into the night. In just 2 nights, the original Windchaser Cavalry Regiment, Cold Vanguard Regiment, and 2 auxiliary battalions had all left. The only ones remaining in the camp were Yang Qindong's 4 auxiliary battalions. Regarding Yang Qindong leaving so few soldiers by his side, both Windchaser Regiment and Commander Wu Sheng expressed their objections. Regarding this, Yang Qindong acted as if he didn't hear anything. He only instructed them to fight according to the plan. This was especially true for Wu Sheng's 3rd Regiment. This was their first time on horseback and they had given up on the most advanced firearms. If they couldn't adapt well, the danger factor on the battlefield would increase by a lot. It wasn't that they couldn't use firearms on horseback, but they would definitely lack stability and accuracy. Therefore, Yang Qindong's request was that unless they were confident, they should fight with cavalry swords. Since they were cavalry, they should be used to fighting on horseback and using cold weapons to hack and slash. Under Yang Qindong's insistence, the main force was finally sent out. Only 4 auxiliary battalions were left. They were led by Commander Lu Zhua. Lu Zhua was left behind. When he woke up on the morning of the 3rd day, his entire body was filled with nervousness and excitement. Yang Qindong saw all of this and couldn't help but smile. "Commander Lu, don't be so nervous. Everything is ready. You just need to do what you normally do in battle and training. Yes, don't be nervous. 6th Young Master. I'm just excited. Thank you for trusting our auxiliary soldiers and handing the heavy responsibility of protecting your safety to us." Lu Zhua really wasn't nervous. He had fought dozens of battles, big and small. The nervousness of a new battlefield wouldn't appear on a veteran like him. But just as he said, he was truly excited. Yang Qindong had sent out all of the main force and only left 4 auxiliary battalions at home. If this wasn't trust in the auxiliary soldiers, then what was it? In reality, it was impossible for only 4 auxiliary battalions to be at home. For example, Guard Squad 1 and 2 and Ghost Sniper Squad were all left by Yang Qindong's side. These people added up to nearly 100. In reality, their strength was several times greater than their own. With these people around, Yang Qindong could be said to be safe enough. But if Lu Zhua was willing to think this way, he naturally wouldn't correct him. "Good. It's good that you know this young master trusts you. Since it's like this, perform well today." Yang Qindong chuckled. Then he looked at Ding Shan, who had been standing beside him for a long time, and said, "Company Commander Ding, it's about time. You can leave now. Remember, don't be rash. Just follow the plan and there won't be any problems." "Yes, 6th Young Master, I will remember." Ding Shan was a little nervous and nodded respectfully. This was the 6th Young Master. To be able to be remembered and stand beside him for a while was something to be proud of.
Everything was ready, except for the east wind. This east wind referred to the arrival of the transaction time.
After Ding Shan received the order, he led a company of his subordinates and rode out of the camp with the 150,000 taels of silver, rushing towards the area 10 li ahead.
At the same time, the Nuzan cavalry in Narcissus town also started to move. General Hulu was the vanguard, and Borte was the center of the army.
They brought 3,000 cavalrymen out of the town.
Only General Hulu was left behind to watch the Mongol cavalry's every move. Borte has left. Humph. How arrogant. He didn't even see an extra warhorse. It's obvious that he wants to make a move. Teimu brought a few soldiers and watched the Nuzan cavalry leave the town. Then, he returned to report to Ba Zhen. Very good. Looks like our guess was right. Since that's the case, let's get ready to move. Ha! Ba Zhen chuckled. At this moment, his eyes were filled with excitement. If this matter was settled well, Narcissus town would be his leader in the future. The Mongol cavalry under his command would also welcome a great opportunity for development. Teimu nodded heavily and turned around to gather the troops. Previously, to prevent their intentions from being discovered by the Nuzan, they didn't even tell the cavalrymen that there was a battle mission today. It would take some time to gather the troops now. Borte set off. 3,000 cavalrymen marched out until they were about 10 miles away from the 5-star army. That was also the location of the transaction that both sides had agreed on. It was about 10 miles away from each other's territory. No one had to worry about an ambush. In reality, neither side had arranged any troops to ambush within 10 miles. Borte didn't care about it. As long as his cavalry charged forward, what kind of enemy would be their match? Yang Qindong had prepared enough backup plans. He was worried that he would alert the enemy. Naturally, he didn't arrange any troops to ambush them at the location of the transaction. Therefore, when both sides appeared here in the dark, they were very calm. However, when Ding Shan looked forward and saw that General Hulu, who had drunk a bowl of wine with him, didn't even bring an extra warhorse, he couldn't help but frown. General Hulu, I've brought the silver. Where are the warhorses we need? Ha ha ha, the warhorses are right in front of you. We're riding on them. How about it? They're all good breeds, right? Hulu chuckled and said shamelessly. Hulu's vanguard was exactly 1,000 cavalrymen. It was the same as the 1,000 warhorses they had agreed on. Although the numbers were correct, Ding Shan didn't believe it. His expression turned cold as he asked, General Hulu, it's rare for you to drink to your heart's content. How can you be so unreliable? Since you don't have any sincerity, then we'll talk about it when you do. Let's go. Ding Shan was very decisive. He led the 100 cavalrymen and left without any hesitation. From how quickly they retreated, it was obvious that this wasn't a decision they had just made. They had been prepared for this for a long time. Chapter 646. Hulu was stunned by the sudden change in the situation. His mission was to stall Ding Shan and wait for General Borte to arrive with the main force. Then, they would attack together and chase after Ding Shan's troops. They would attack the 5-star army's camp in one fell swoop. But now, Ding Shan had escaped before General Borte arrived. This was not in line with the plan. General, what should we do? Should we chase or wait for General Borte? The deputy general beside him was also confused by the scene in front of him. He asked Hulu for instructions. Chase. Leave one person behind to inform the general. The rest of you, follow me. Hulu, who was a straightforward person, decided not to wait any longer. Since there was a change in the plan, he would follow suit. Although 1,000 men was not enough, he was confident in the cavalry under his command. Even if the enemy was several times their number, they would still be able to fight and win. Leaving one person behind to inform the rear, Hulu led the 1,000 cavalry to chase after Ding Shan's 100 men. They shouted and screamed along the way, giving off the sound of their race's charge. Don't be too anxious. Maintain the formation and don't let them lose track of us. Riding on his horse, Ding Shan glanced back and sneered. He was the first to run, so he naturally had the advantage. As long as he was out of the range of the arrows, he would be able to complete his mission. The cavalry directly followed Ding Shan's left and right as they retreated back to the mercenary camp. After running for a while, they could see the camp in the distance. The 100 men immediately split into two groups, one on the left and one on the right. They gave up on the open space in the middle and returned to the camp. Far away from the camp, Yang Chendong and the 4 auxiliary battalions had been waiting for a long time. Behind them were the horses that were originally used for transportation. Now, all the goods on them had been unloaded. From afar, it looked like there were war horses everywhere. "Young master, Commander Ding is back." Tiger's Mane pointed forward with a confident smile on his face. Hu Lu, who was in the middle of chasing, saw the prey in front of him split into two groups. He was stunned at first, but then a look of disdain appeared in his eyes. "Humph! You want to split up my troops? I won't fall for your trick. Come on, let's charge together." Hu Lu didn't seem to be fooled. He continued to charge forward with his 1,000 men. As the war horses continued to advance, they were getting closer and closer to the mercenary camp. 3 miles, 2.5 miles, 2 miles. When they finally reached the distance of 2 miles, deafening roars suddenly rang out beside the charging Nuzen cavalrymen. Finally, a cavalryman stepped into the minefield and detonated the mines buried there. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. There was a sudden explosion in the midst of the cavalry. In an instant, countless cavalrymen were blasted off their horses. Those who were on top of the landmines were blasted into the air along with their horses. Even the aftermath of the landmines injured countless Nuzen cavalrymen, causing them to wail in pain as they fell off their horses. Damn it! They had only advanced about 100 meters, but they had already paid the price of nearly 100 riders. This made Hu Lu gnash his teeth in anger. Seeing that they were still some distance away from the mercenary camp, he had no choice but to give the order to stop moving forward and gather his troops in place. As soon as Hu Lu's vanguard stopped, the 2,000 cavalrymen led by Borte rushed over. Seeing the mess on the ground and the many injured cavalrymen, Borte rode forward and asked coldly with a frown, "What happened?" They cheated." Hu Lu didn't know how to explain, so he simply attributed everything to the enemy's trick. Cheated? Borte was stunned at first, but after he heard what happened from Hu Lu, his face turned ugly. So they were prepared. Humph. Do you really think that you can stop the advance of our cavalry with that explosive thing on the ground? Borte's face was filled with disapproval. Although the 5-star army's trick did hurt his troops, it was still a battle between the two sides. In the end, it was still a battle between two armies that depended on strength. It was still a real battle, and tricks were only supplementary. Besides, that thing had already exploded once, and it was impossible for it to explode a second time. How many cavalrymen did he have? Even if he sent them out one by one, they would still be able to cover a distance of 2 miles. At that time, it would be time for them to raise their butcher's knife and start a massacre. Oh right, you said that Ding Shan didn't retreat to the middle, but to the sides. You didn't see anything exploding there, right? Although he didn't think so, it was better to not sacrifice himself if he didn't have to. Borte thought of something and asked Hu Lu. Yes, they went to the sides, so it was very safe. Thinking back to Ding Shan's retreat route, Borte thought that the enemy wanted to divide his troops. They already knew that there was something buried underground. Okay. Borte didn't care so much at this moment. He only knew that if the enemy could leave, they could also leave. Since that's the case, we will also split into 2 groups. You lead one group, and I will lead the other. We will rush in from both sides and outflank them. At that time, we will definitely let those people know that we, the Nuzen cavalry, are not to be trifled with. Borte's face was burning with anger. In such a short time, more than 200 of his brothers had died, which clearly angered Borte. Yes. Hu Lu's face was also filled with anger. It was rare for him to be at a disadvantage like this. If the two sides met face to face, no matter what the result was, he would be able to accept it. If he couldn't win, then it was because his skills weren't as good as the enemy's. But to be able to succeed with a trick like this really made him feel bitter. The less than 3,000 cavalrymen began to split up. Borte went to the left, Hu Lu went to the right, and the 2 groups of cavalrymen began to advance from the sides, as if they were going to outflank the enemy. Young master, they are learning from Company Commander Ding. Tiger's Mane's eyesight was still very good. As soon as the other side made a move, he saw through it. At this moment, Yang Chendong was sitting on a bamboo chair. He didn't know where he got a paper fan in his hand. From time to time, he would brush it twice. At this time, Fan Xian really looked like Zhuge Liang on TV. He was completely strategizing and winning from 1,000 miles away. Listening to Tiger's Mane's words, Yang Chendong nodded lightly. This is originally a checkmate. No matter what choice they make, it is destined that there will only be one result.
These words were said very calmly, without any emotion, as if the next thing to die in front of him was not 3,000 cavalrymen, but 3,000 ants that had nothing to do with him.
These words were not just empty words. After 2 days of preparation, Yang Chendong really set up a dead end here. Even if the other side wanted to jump out now and did not want to fight anymore, it was still a dead end. When they were chasing Ding Shan, this net had already been cast. Now what they had to do was to close the net. Come on, signal the flag, cut off the enemy's retreat, and be ready to detonate the passive mines at any time. At the same time, order the 4 auxiliary battalions to be ready to fire. The calmer Yang Chendong was, the more excited Tiger's Mane was. This was his 6th young master. He was always so confident, and there was never anything that could stop him. Beta Persei, go and execute the order. Tiger's Mane turned around and said to the tall Beta Persei who was the flag bearer. Okay. Beta Persei stood up straight and began to wave the 2 red and black flags in his hands, constantly making various movements. With a series of movements, the ground under their feet seemed to move. Tremble, tremble. It was as if the earth was roaring, or as if an earth dragon was born, an earthquake is coming. This movement also caused the Jurchen cavalrymen who had just split up to stop and watch. The ground behind them was filled with dust, covering the sky and the sun.
Then, one by one, the cavalrymen in military green uniforms began to slowly appear in their sight.
1, 2, 3. They couldn't even count. Where did the reinforcements come from? When Borte saw the other side's neat uniform, his face changed drastically, and he spoke with a somewhat panicked voice. Didn't the scouts say that the 5th Star Army only had 3,000 cavalrymen? If that was the case, then where did the cavalrymen behind them come from?
Could it be that the information was wrong, or... No matter what, he was still a general who commanded an army.
Borte's brain worked very quickly.
After thinking for a while, his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked forward and said, I know, they sent all the cavalrymen behind us, and there aren't many enemies in front of us.
They want to attack us from both sides. General, what should we do? The Jurchen cavalrymen who followed Borte all asked with an ugly expression. It was supposed to be a one-sided massacre. Even if they encountered some resistance, it should be sporadic. How did they become dumpling fillings and were about to be wrapped up? The most frightening thing in a war was unexpected situations, because it often meant that one side had miscalculated. It meant that they had lost their innate advantage in wisdom and strategy. The unknown was the most frightening thing. Some people were already worried about what kind of serious consequences the general's miscalculation would bring to them. In other words, because of the unexpected situation, the Jurchen cavalrymen's morale was already unstable. If this situation was allowed to develop, it might cause the morale of the cavalrymen to drop. If that happened, no matter how many soldiers they had, they wouldn't be able to fight back. Borte was very clear about this, and he naturally didn't want to see this happen. He immediately shouted, Don't be afraid, the enemy's main force is behind us, and there aren't many enemies in front of us. As long as we are fast enough, we can completely defeat the enemy's main force. Then, we will be able to gain a foothold, turn around, and destroy the enemy behind us. Victory will be ours. Chapter 647. Victory belongs to us. A few of the centurions behind Borte shouted in unison. Their shouts did indeed stabilize the morale of the troops. At this moment, not only did their morale not decrease, it actually increased. They slapped their war horses and charged forward. In their eyes, it was only a distance of 2 miles. They could reach the enemy with a single charge. The choice of the Nuzan cavalry was equivalent to announcing that they had given up all paths of retreat. There was only one way, and that was to charge, and charge again. This choice naturally disappointed the cavalry division, the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard,
and the 2 auxiliary cavalry battalions. This also meant that they had no chance of fighting a tough battle. This was especially so for the cavalry division led by Windchaser. They wanted to perform well and fight the legendary Nuzan cavalry head-on. But now, all their hopes were dashed. Even so, they had no intention of stopping. Instead, they continued to advance until they reached the place where Borte and Hulu were standing. Then, they took up their positions. Close to 3,000 cavalrymen lined up in a row. Each of them held a bow and arrow in their hands. They were ready to shoot, not allowing the enemy to retreat to their front. The cavalrymen no longer felt any pressure. At this moment, all the pressure was transferred to the battlefield. Lu Zhua, the commander of the auxiliary troops, who had long been prepared, shouted out his orders. His 4 battalions of 1,600 auxiliary soldiers all held their Type 81 rifles in their hands and prepared to shoot at any moment.
Everyone, listen to my orders. Do not let any enemy within 400 meters of us go. Shoot. Lu Zhua shouted as loudly as he could.
His voice was transmitted to the ears of every soldier. As soon as he shouted, a rain of bullets shot forward without stopping.
It didn't look like it was going to stop any time soon. The sound of gunfire was accompanied by an earth-shattering explosion. Under the leadership of Dao Xiao, the 2nd Guard Division began to pull on the long ropes in their hands, triggering the passive mines buried on both sides of the ground.
Every time there was a loud bang, a large number of Nuzan cavalrymen would be inexplicably sent into the air. When they fell to the ground, no matter if it was the people or the horses, none of them could breathe.
They were all as dead as they could be. Explosions and gunshots rang out, smashing into the advancing Nuzan cavalrymen like a club.
This naturally caused the rhythm of the attack to come to a halt.
Fortunately, these cavalrymen's equestrian skills were not bad. They did not collide with each other in this chaotic situation and cause secondary injuries. The Nuzan cavalrymen were all frightened by this scene.
Especially the cavalrymen in front and those within 400 meters of the 5-star army camp.
After they were all turned into lifeless corpses, no one dared to charge forward. They only instinctively stopped their horses and stared at the front and back. The front was like a valley of death. Any cavalryman who dared to approach within 400 meters would die without exception. The distance of 400 meters was too far for the cavalrymen to catch up. They looked at the bows in their hands that could only shoot for 100 meters. They suddenly felt powerless. Behind them were countless enemy cavalrymen.
There were rows and rows of them, as though they could not see the end of them.
These cavalrymen held strong bows and arrows.
Although they had not fired a single arrow, all of the Nuzan cavalrymen knew that once they turned around and charged forward, they would become the target of the arrow rain.
They would be turned into porcupines in an instant.
This was what it meant to be trapped in a dilemma.
This result made Borte feel as if his brain had short-circuited.
It was as if the previous plan was for them to appear in an unstoppable manner and win the final battle.
But now, why did it seem like they had become the prey in the eyes of the enemy? They were trapped in a dilemma. Borte was not the only one who was confused. Even the cavalrymen led by Windchaser, who was their opponent, were confused. Other than Windchaser, Deng Yu, Gao Danhua, and Ding Shan, who were originally members of the Cold Vanguard, the others joined the 5-star army later. Most of them had not even seen the most advanced muskets before. How could they know the power of these muskets? But now, they saw the power of these new muskets with their own eyes.
They only had half of the strength of the cavalrymen, but they were able to withstand the pressure of the enemy.
The enemy did not dare to charge past the last 400 meters, forming a natural chasm of death.
It was no wonder that the 6th young master had been so calm and confident. It was no wonder that they were able to achieve a great victory without injuring a single person when dealing with the 2,000 cavalrymen of the Jianghu left guards. It was no wonder that the Cold Vanguard soldiers, who were infantrymen, were so arrogant when facing the faster and fiercer cavalrymen.
It turned out that this was their trump card and their true combat strength. Sighs, admiration, envy, and all kinds of emotions burst out at this moment. At the same time, depression, fear, and trembling emotions appeared one by one on the Nuzan cavalrymen. In just a short while, 600 to 700 of the 3,000 cavalrymen had died in battle. This was because they had stopped moving forward in time. Otherwise, there would have been even more people who would have died. Faced with this unexpected situation, Borte and Hulu were at a loss as to what to do. They were at a loss as to what to do next. Heaven and earth were not benevolent, but they would always leave people with a chance to live. Just like now, after receiving Tiger's main signal, Beta Persei put down the black and red flags in his hand and shouted loudly. Listen up, our young master is benevolent and will give you a way to live. Put down your weapons and lead your horses out to surrender. Otherwise, we will kill 10 of you every minute until you are completely wiped out. Choose for yourself whether you want to live or die. Beta Persei repeated his words twice to make sure that the other party could hear him clearly. Only then did he close his mouth in satisfaction. Although he did not move a finger in today's battle, nor did he kill a single person, he felt extremely good in his heart. Think about it. He was the one who made the flag signals, which gave him the feeling of commanding an army of thousands of men and horses. He was the one who persuaded them to surrender, which gave him the feeling of being in control of life. And no matter which one it was enough to satisfy Beta Persei. Yes, Beta Persei was persuading them to surrender, which was naturally Yang Qindong's intention. In order to reach into the Walla's territory, the front line was thousands of miles away, so there was naturally no need to count on replenishing the troops. In such an environment, how to create his own forces and achieve the mission of military goals became the problem that Yang Qindong needed to think about. After thinking about it for a long time, strengthening the army became a must. Without enough troops, not to mention whether they could win the war, who would be able to defend the territory they had conquered? People were the foundation of development, and Yang Qindong put this idea on the Nuzan cavalry. This was an ambitious tribe, as well as a horse-riding tribe with powerful combat strength. In later generations, there was a saying that the Nuzan were undefeatable. But that was a matter for the future. Right now, they were only focusing on the small piece of land in front of them. Now they were still thinking about how to survive and develop. Take them under your wing before they have any ambitions. Then, they won't be a hindrance to your development in the future. Instead, they will only be of help. Setting up this trap was to absorb more captives from the Nuzan cavalry. This was why Beta Persei shouted and why Borte was in a dilemma. Beta Persei's roar spread out, but there was no immediate answer. After all, to be able to become a cavalry, they were somewhat proud. It was unrealistic to expect them to surrender in the face of difficulties. Of course, if they surrendered so easily, it would be difficult for such an army to achieve anything, and they would not be valued by Yang Qindong. After 2 rounds of fighting, the battlefield fell into a strange silence again. After a minute of silence, the members of the Ghost Sniper team opened fire. They did not use their usual sniper rifle, but the most common Type 81 assault rifle to begin their roll call journey. Bang bang bang. Bang bang bang. Exactly 10 gunshots were fired, and 10 Nuzan cavalry who did not know what happened fell from their horses. One by one, they were shot in the forehead and fell to the ground. Very good. Get ready for the next group. Captain Baizwa said slowly, sighing in his heart. This kind of training with real people as targets is definitely the best opportunity to improve the marksmanship of his team members. This will also greatly overcome the psychological barrier when they kill people. At this moment, he even thought that it would be best if these Nuzan cavalry did not surrender. In this way, his team members will have more opportunities for actual combat training. They really dare to kill people. 10 people were really killed. Some of the more attentive ones even counted the number of deaths. As the screams continued, the expressions of the Nuzan cavalrymen turned ugly. Some of them even intentionally hid behind the people around them. Clearly, they were looking for a human shield. Bang 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 bang. Another minute passed, and another 10 Nuzan cavalry were killed on their horses, causing a commotion and chaos. The unpredictable marksmanship of the Ghost Sniper team has completely destroyed the psychological defense of the Nuzan cavalry. More and more people looked at Borte or Hulu. After seeing this kind of gaze many times, even the 2 generals couldn't help but feel scared. Especially Borte. Some of the cavalry near him have already pulled out their sabers and were eager to fight. It seems that if they do not surrender in the next breath, they will cut them down. Chapter 648. What do you want to do? Feeling the dangerous atmosphere around him, Borte asked with a lack of confidence. It's true that he's a general, but in the face of life and death, he doesn't think that this identity is useful. No one said a word. More and more cavalrymen got closer and closer. Perhaps they know their general well. He's the kind of person who won't bow his head easily. It may be difficult to persuade their general to surrender. Since that's the case, It's better to tie him up or kill him. That way, no one can stop them from surrendering, or they can choose a way to live.
We surrender.
While the atmosphere around Borte was tense, Hulu on the other side had already made the final decision. Unlike Borte, no one dared to make any threatening moves towards Hulu. They just focused their attention on him. Just from this point alone, Hulu's position in the hearts of the cavalrymen below must be higher. Even now, no one had any ideas about him, which could be seen from this. It was precisely because everyone trusted him and was willing to put their lives in his hands that Hulu decided to surrender in return for their sake. With Hulu's temperament, he would rather die than surrender. This can be seen from the fact that he just rode to the front of the cavalry and put his body under the muzzle of the ghost sniper team. It's just that when Yang Chendong saw his heavy armor, he recognized his identity and ordered the sniper team not to hurt him. On the other side, Borte kept hiding behind other soldiers, completely showing his cowardly side. Hulu announced his surrender, which made more people's eyes fall on Borte. Although there are many people in these cavalry who are not afraid of death, but knowing that they can't win and still continue to fight, that's not courage, but stupidity. Unable to bear the huge pressure, seeing that a new minute was up, Borte finally spat out the word surrender with difficulty. Hearing this, the Nuzan cavalry couldn't help but rejoice. In any case, they don't have to die, and no matter what kind of problem they will face next, is there anything more terrible than death? Since they all chose to surrender, the next thing was much easier. Everyone threw down their weapons and led their war horses forward. Every time a person came forward, there would be auxiliary soldiers who would tie them up with ropes. A total of 2,200 people had become captives on the battlefield.
Commander Lu, I'll leave these captives to you.
The rest will follow me into Narcissus town. Beta Persei, bring Borte and Huru. The high-spirited Yang Chendong waved his hand. After a simple assembly, the mighty army rushed toward Narcissus town, which was 20 miles away. A tense standoff was going on in Narcissus town. The two sides were the 2,500 Mongol cavalry led by Ba Zhen and Taimu and the 1,000 Nuzan cavalry led by Huili Bu. Not long after Borte left the town with his 3,000 cavalrymen, Bagan and the others began to gather their troops. It took them a full 2 hours to gather their troops and prepare to leave the town. However, Huili, who had already received news of Borte's arrival, stopped them on the way out of the town. At the exit of Narcissus town, Huili Bu had already set up a huge formation, blocking the path to the outside world. When Ba Zhen and Taimu arrived, they saw this scene.
Huili Bu,
what are you trying to do?
Get out of the way.
Taimu reprimanded loudly with a displeased look on his face when he saw that the road ahead was blocked. Why should I get out of the way? I'm here on General Borte's orders. As for you guys, go back to where you came from. I'm not riding on a horse when I return, he said casually as he dug his ears. The more casual Huili Bu was, the angrier Taimu got. Why should we listen to you? This is the only way out of town. The road belongs to everyone. Do you think it's reasonable for you to occupy this place? Hee, don't try to reason with me. My orders are to guard this place and prevent anyone from passing.
Does anyone know?
Of course, if anyone doesn't follow the rules, our general will definitely seek an explanation when he returns. Taimu, do you think you can withstand General Borte's anger? Even though they had fewer people than the enemy, Huili Bu was still very confident. He usually didn't argue with Ba Zhen and the rest because he considered the Mongolian army's background. He considered the fact that the combined forces of the two sides were even more powerful. Even the Baiming army wouldn't dare to underestimate them. However, if they were to take the initiative to look for trouble, it would be a different story. Do you really think we're afraid of you? Men, draw your cavalry swords and prepare for battle. Taimu was also a hot-blooded man. How could he be so scared that he didn't dare to move just because of the other party's threat? As he spoke, he drew the saber from his waist. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The group of Mongolian cavalry followed suit and drew their weapons. It was as if they had no choice but to charge out if they didn't get out of the way. The situation became very tense. Huili Bu had no choice but to put away his playful attitude. He straightened his body and drew his cavalry sword at the same time. Since Borte asked him to guard this place, he had to guard this place. As for whether the Mongolian army dared to attack, Taimu didn't have the final say. It was all up to General Ba. General Hui Li Bu placed his hopes on Ba General soon. This person appeared. The moment Ba Gen appeared and saw the situation, he pretended to be angry and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? We're friends with the Zhenren. How can you treat your friends like this? Put away your cavalry swords." As soon as Ba Gen appeared, he reprimanded Tai Mu-er. This made Tai Mu-er and the cavalryman beside him look dejected. However, since the general had spoken, no one dared to disobey. They could only put away their weapons with a wronged expression. Hee hee. After his subordinates put away their cavalry swords, Ba Gen turned to look at Hui Li Bu and said, "General, what do you think of our sincerity? However, this time, we really have something to do outside the city. I hope you can make things easy for us." Hui Li Bu wasn't very satisfied with Ba Gen's tone of negotiation. However, when it came to leaving the town, his expression became very serious. "General Ba Gen, it's not that I don't agree. This is General Borte's idea. You know our general's temper. If I dare to disobey, I'm afraid I will suffer a lot. General, please understand. Just wait here for a while. Actually, it won't be long before it ends." Hui Li Bu was full of confidence. His tone wasn't harsh, but the meaning he expressed was unwavering. Ba Gen's brows furrowed together. With his current military strength, it was indeed possible for him to take care of Borte. But what if Borte returned with his army? Would he still be a match for him? Just because he wanted to earn some money, he would have to fight to the death with Borte. It didn't seem worth it. Most importantly, he wanted to see how much damage the five-star army could inflict on Borte with his warning. If the other party's strength was greatly reduced, then he would be able to take advantage of the situation. On the other hand, if the other party easily obtained victory, then it was best not to provoke them. Ba Gen shrank back. In front of Hui Li Bu, he forced a smile and said, "All right, then I'll wait for General Borte to return before leaving the town." Secretly, he was waiting for the results. Of course, only Ba Gen knew why he was so weak. He was a Mongol, and he used the Mongol cavalry as a banner. However, in the eyes of the Mongol people, he was nothing. Even now, he hadn't contacted a real Mongol noble, someone who was willing to be his backer and speak for him. Others might think that he had a high-level Mongol background, but the truth was only he knew. Otherwise, he only needed to borrow 5,000 heavy cavalry from the Mongol cavalry, and dealing with Borte would be child's play. Ba Gen stopped walking out of the town. Hui Li Bu had a smile on his face and didn't say anything. However, in the eyes of the other Mongol cavalry, this was a completely different matter. They didn't understand. They clearly had the advantage in terms of numbers and combat strength, so why do they have to act according to the other party's wishes? They didn't understand. The confrontation had been formed just like that, and before Borte returned, it wouldn't end. Everyone had their own plans. This wait lasted for nearly 2 hours. Then, the ground began to tremble. As a qualified cavalryman, everyone knew that something had happened. Ha ha ha! General Borte must have returned with his army. The first to be happy was Hui Li. Even though he looked like he wasn't afraid of anything, he was actually very nervous. He was afraid that Bagan would suddenly attack. If that was the case, there was no chance of victory for 1,000 against 2,500 people. Fortunately, the tense moment had passed, and Borte had returned. This way, the pressure on him would be completely lifted. Overjoyed, he turned around and looked behind him. It wasn't just Hui Li Bu. Ba Gen also looked out anxiously. He wanted to see how many losses Borte had suffered. This would determine whether he would fight or retreat. Dust flew everywhere, and the cavalry soldiers were getting closer and closer. In terms of numbers, there seemed to be a lot of them. Ba Gen's heart trembled, and he helplessly thought that the 5-star army was too weak. He had already sent people to warn them, but they were still defeated. Was he going to be suppressed by Borte in the future? Chapter 649. Of course, Hui Li was in high spirits. When he saw the troops getting closer and closer, the first person he saw was Borte. He was overjoyed and shouted, "General, congratulations on your triumphant return." Retreat! Bagan also saw Borte at the front of the cavalry. He knew that he had lost his chance, so he turned around and left without hesitation. Bagan retreated, leaving only Hui Libu and his cavalry at the town gate. He looked at Borte with an excited expression, waiting for the general to laugh arrogantly. It seemed that Borte would do this every time he won a battle. Hui Libu knew Borte too well. That's why he was so hopeful. That's why he noticed something was wrong. In his eyes, Borte didn't laugh this time. Instead, he looked listless. If he observed carefully, he could even see the nervousness and fear on Borte's body. Something is wrong. Hui Libu was smart and observant. When he looked carefully, he noticed that the people beside Borte weren't his guards. They were people he didn't know. That's why he felt that something was wrong. Congratulations on your triumphant return. The other Nuzan cavalry didn't know about this. When they saw Borte return with a large number of cavalry behind him, they naturally thought that they won the battle. They cheered happily. Hui Libu chose to leave amidst the cheers. Although he didn't know why Borte acted strangely today, it was better for him to leave first for his own safety. If it was really a misunderstanding, he would appear in time. He believed that the general wouldn't blame him for this. Everyone was congratulating the general on his victory. No one noticed that Hui Libu had left quietly. When the cavalry arrived at the entrance of the town and surrounded the 1,000 cavalrymen, Borte asked, "Where are you, Lili?" Ha! At this moment, everyone realized that their general was nowhere to be found. Unable to find his way back, Borte turned around to look at Yang Chendong, who was riding on a white horse behind him. "Don't worry about him. Tell the cavalry to put down their weapons and dismount." Yang Chendong didn't put a small Jurchen general in his eyes. What he was interested in was the 1,000 cavalrymen and 1,000 war horses. "Yes." Borte hurriedly complied, then glanced at the 2 muskets that were secretly staring at him. He turned around and ordered according to Yang Chendong's instructions. "Everyone listen up, dismount, put down your weapons and stand aside." Once the order was given, the 1,000 cavalrymen were stunned and didn't know what to do. It was understandable for the general to dismount. After all, it was a form of courtesy to dismount in front of his superior. But what the hell did he mean by putting down his weapons? "What? Can't you hear my orders?" Seeing that no one obeyed, Borte shouted angrily. He was really afraid. He was afraid that the muzzle of the gun behind him would suddenly erupt with flames. At such a close distance, he had absolutely no chance of survival. Now that the general was gone and Borte was so angry, although they were still somewhat puzzled, out of habit, the cavalrymen took the initiative to dismount and threw their sabers to the ground. "Tie them all up." Seeing that everyone had put down their weapons, Yang Chendong finally didn't want to be behind the scenes. He stood up on his white dragon horse and gave the order. The auxiliary soldiers of the 2 cavalry battalions that surrounded them quickly moved into action, tying up these unarmed Nuzan cavalrymen with ropes. With Borte and Hu Lu at the side, there really wasn't anyone who dared to resist. Of course, this had a lot to do with the promise that Yang Chendong made to them before. On the way here, Yang Chendong said that if the Nuzan cavalrymen were willing to surrender, he wouldn't kill them. On the other hand, if the cavalrymen dared to resist, then they would be killed without mercy. It wasn't impossible to kill them all. Borte was worried that his life would be in danger, so he naturally obeyed. Hulu was really worried that his brothers would be sacrificed for nothing, so he could only cooperate. Just like that, the 1,000 Nuzan cavalrymen were quickly tied up as captives. Leave 2 auxiliary battalions here to watch them. The rest of you surround the Mongol cavalry camp. Those who surrender can live, and those who resist will be killed. Taking advantage of the situation, Yang Chendong gave the order to take down the Mongol cavalry camp. Immediately, the Wind Chaser Cavalry Regiment and Wu Sheng's 3rd Cold Front Regiment moved out. They had more people than the Mongol cavalrymen and split into 2 groups, heading straight for the Mongol cavalry camp on the east side of town. Barjan had already returned to his house in town, his face full of hatred. He originally thought that he would be able to reap the benefits, but now it seemed that the 5-star army was too useless. Borte should have gotten all the benefits. What was he going to do now? With enough money, Borte and the others would definitely welcome a period of development. Narcissus Town was only so big, so was there still room for him to develop and survive? But if he left this place, where would he go? Back to the Mongol lands or to the Walla region? With his measly 2,500 men, it would be like throwing a stone into a pool of water. It wouldn't cause much of a ripple. Moreover, at least 1/5 of the 2,500 men had families in Narcissus town. Would they be willing to leave with him and go to a new place? At this moment, Barjan felt like his head was about to explode. He actually felt like he couldn't see the path ahead.
Lowering his head, Barjan headed deeper into the mansion with his mind in deep thought.
He needed a quiet environment to think things through. Swoosh! A curved blade suddenly appeared and was placed against his neck. The cold feeling made his body tremble involuntarily. He instinctively wanted to kneel on the ground. Don't move. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to hold the blade firmly. If I accidentally cut your neck, you can't blame anyone else. A lazy voice sounded in his ear.
Then, he saw an extremely skinny man appear on his left.
That's right. If you dare to move, you will definitely die. Now, I'll give you a chance to live. This is a rope. Tie it up yourself. Another voice sounded from his right. Contrary to his left, this person was extremely muscular. With just a glance, one could tell that he was at least 180 pounds. These two people were the members of the Wolf Fong Special Forces, Shou Ho and King Kong. Yesterday, the Wolf Fong Special Forces had been ordered to infiltrate Narcissus town. Just now, they had used the opportunity when the Mongol cavalry was on the move to sneak into Barjan's house. They only needed to wait for the other party to turn around to take control. Shou Ho and King Kong's abilities were considered top-notch even in the special forces. Furthermore, they had already hidden and attacked suddenly. How could Barjan have the chance to resist? Looking at the rope that was thrown at his feet, he lowered his head to pick it up. He didn't want to die, so he followed the orders of others and tied his hands tightly. Just as Barjan was captured, another member of his team, General Taimur, also encountered the members of the Wolf Fong Special Forces in his own house.
The difference was that he had chosen to resist with all his might. At the entrance of the town, when the army had no choice but to retreat, Taimur was already full of anger.
He couldn't understand why the general didn't allow him to fight. In his opinion, even if he was defeated or killed in the end, it would be better than being wronged. As he felt wronged and couldn't think straight, Taimur didn't return to the camp with the army. Instead, he returned to his house in the town. He had to think carefully about what was going on and whether he could continue to trust and follow Barjan. At this moment, the members of the Special Forces made their move. They used Silver Hand and Steel Leg to deal with him. Their sudden attack had indeed caught Taimur off guard.
However, because the other party resisted with all his might, and because they had been ordered not to kill, the three of them actually got tangled up in a fight.
There wasn't a clear winner immediately. Sigh, you guys are really embarrassing. 2 against 1 and you still can't complete the mission. Another person had appeared on the roof.
He was equally tall, and his arms were 1/5 longer than an ordinary person's.
He was the violent ape of the Wolf Fong Special Forces. In order to ensure that the mission was completed smoothly, the captain Tai Hu had arranged for reinforcements in every team to prevent accidents from happening. The violent ape was the reinforcements arranged for Silver Hand and Steel Leg. They were actually being looked down upon. How could the two of them take this lying down? When they saw that Taimur was still resisting, they couldn't help but feel angry. After the two of them looked at each other, they decided to go all out. After all, the 6th young master's orders were not to kill or seriously injure anyone. Hence, it wouldn't be considered disobeying orders if they caused external injuries. Silver Hand and Steel Leg became serious. Their hands and legs cooperated very well. Taimur soon couldn't hold on any longer. He was good at horseback fighting. It wasn't easy for him to hold on until now when he was fighting on land and facing an expert. After bracing himself and exchanging a punch with Silver Hand, Taimur, who was retreating quickly, revealed an opening under his feet. Steel Leg seized the opportunity and swept his long leg, knocking Taimur to the ground. Then, he took out a rope and tied Taimur up tightly. At this point, the 2 main generals of the Mongolian army were under control. They were brought to the entrance of the Mongolian army camp. Here, they saw Yang Qindong riding on a white dragon horse. Under his extraordinarily tall and handsome figure, he was wearing a red robe. Together with the red 5-star flag beside him, he gave off a dazzling feeling at first glance. At the same time, it naturally reflected Yang Qindong's lofty, grand, and noble aura. 6th young master, I've brought them. Tai Hu, the captain of the Wolfang Special Forces, gave a standard military salute and stepped aside, revealing Bagan and Taimur behind him. Yang Qindong only glanced at the two of them. He nodded lightly and said, "I'll give you a chance. Persuade your cavalry to surrender." Chapter 650. He clearly needed their help, but now, he was saying that he was giving them a chance. How could the prideful Bagan and Taimur accept it? After all, they were generals of an army. Why should I? After guessing Yang Qindong's intention, Bagan did not think that he was useless even though he was a prisoner. On the contrary, he wanted to raise conditions and benefits. "You talk too much." Beta Persei, who was standing on his horse, snorted. Then, he strode forward with a large demon head blade in his hand. Judging from the model of the demon head blade, it was probably similar to the one used by executioners. As he approached step by step, Bagan, who was tied up, looked worse and worse. "You! What are you doing? Let me tell you, I'm a Mongolian. If you dare to touch me, you'll be making an enemy out of Mongolia. The consequences will be..." Just as he was halfway through his words, an extremely mournful scream rang out. Along with the scream, a complete arm flew in the wind and was separated from the body. Then, blood splattered everywhere, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Bagan's left arm was chopped off from his body. And all this was because he was disobedient and said a few threatening words. Beta Persei, who had chopped off his left arm, acted as if he had done something very normal. Even his aura did not fluctuate. Instead, he said to Bagan in a very calm voice, "Our young master has said something, so it cannot be changed. Anyone who dares to provoke and question him will end up like this." Yang Er's cold attitude frightened Bagan. Even though his entire body was in extreme pain and he felt like he would faint at any moment, he obediently shut his mouth and didn't dare to refute Yang Er's words. Yang Er's cold attitude frightened Bagan. Even though his entire body was in extreme pain and he felt like he would faint at any moment, he obediently shut his mouth and didn't dare to refute Yang Er. Yang Qindong saw everything that happened in front of him. He did not even look at Bagan. When Bagan did not even dare to wail, he continued, "All right, now go and persuade your subordinates to surrender." He spoke slowly, unhurriedly, as if he was having a normal conversation. However, both Ba Zhen and Taimur remained silent. No one was an idiot. They knew that they were no match for him, yet they would still stand out and provoke him. Silence was a tacit agreement. Everyone followed Ba Zhen and Taimur, who were missing an arm and had bandages tied around their shoulders, towards the Mongol cavalry camp. Outside the gate of the military camp, the mercenary cavalry had already surrounded the place. Their guns and bows were ready to shoot, as if they would kill anyone who dared to resist. Within the military camp, the 2,500 Mongolian cavaliers also rode on their horses as if they were facing a great enemy. They held all sorts of weapons in their hands. They had just returned to the barracks. Many of them didn't even have time to take off their armor before the situation changed drastically. They were surrounded in the barracks. This would save them the time to put on their armor. However, the Mongolian cavalry did not even think about it. Since the 5-star army could suddenly appear, they would have the time to launch a surprise attack on the camp. But he didn't do that. Could there be a reason? Of course there was a reason. Yang Qindong wanted to make more Mongolian cavaliers work for him. If they were to charge around like this, who knew how many people would die? These cavaliers could become the elite cavalry of the 5-star army in the future. It was best not to kill them if possible. This was the reason why they only surrounded and did not attack. The funny thing was that these Mongolian cavaliers thought that they had the power to resist and gather together. Fortunately, they were smart. At the very least, they were not stupid. They knew that they were surrounded and did not take the initiative to attack. If that was the case, even if Yang Qindong wanted to make them work for him, he would have to kill a bunch of them first as an example to others. Originally, both sides were still in a stalemate and the situation was very tense. With the arrival of Ba Zhen and Taimur, the atmosphere became even more tense. This was especially so when some of the cavaliers saw that their general Ba Zhen had lost his left arm. Some of them could not help but curse. "They injured our general. Let him go. Let our general go. A bunch of cowards who only know how to launch sneak attacks. If you have the guts, fight me face to face."
Let the general go and get out of Narcissus town. There were all kinds of shouts, but the strange thing was that there were not many people shouting. If one were to really count, there were only about 100 people. In a camp of more than 2,000 cavaliers, there were only about 100 people shouting.
The others were just watching without making a sound. Was this not strange? Of course it was strange. Yang Chendong was originally looking at the scene in front of him cautiously. He was thinking about how to get out of this situation.
However, when he saw the scene in front of him, the corner of his mouth curled up and he smiled. No matter how others saw it, he finally understood that Ba Zhen, as a general, did not have the hearts of his men.
This could be seen from the shouts. Why would Yang Chendong make such a statement? Because he put himself in Ba Zhen's shoes.
If he was the one who was captured by the enemy, his men would definitely shout in unison. Even if he did not say that every one of them would shout, he was confident that 50 to 60% of them would shout. This was the hearts of his men. When a general had the hearts of his men, his every move would naturally attract the attention of the soldiers. If he was in any danger, everyone would do their best to help him.
Even if they knew that they would be courting death, no one would back down.
On the other hand, a general who did not have the hearts of his men could rely on his status to suppress others when nothing happened to him. However, if something happened to him, not only would no one save him, they would even want him to die. After having such thoughts in his heart, Yang Chendong did not act immediately. Instead, his gaze fell on Taimur. He pointed at him and said, "Take him out and let him be in charge of persuading them to surrender."
Beta Persei was in charge of this matter. He immediately nodded and stretched out his hand to pull Taimur to his front. The man, who was about 80 to 70 kilograms, was lifted up like a little chick in his hands. He was then thrown out of the camp entrance.
Listen to the young master and persuade them to surrender. This will not only benefit you but also the soldiers.
General, are you all right? General, how are you feeling? The moment Beta Persei's voice fell, the Mongolian soldiers in the camp began to shout. Just based on the volume of their voices, there were close to 1,000 people shouting. This was enough to prove Yang Chendong's previous deduction. It also proved that in the hearts of these Mongolian soldiers, Taimur's position was much higher than Bagan's. These were the lovable soldiers. Don't think that they were just obedient machines. No one knew better than them who treated them well and who did not. They had a scale to weigh them. When the soldiers shouted, Taimur, who was tied up, furrowed his brows. Then, he slowly shifted his gaze and looked at the 5-star army soldiers surrounding them. He looked at them for a long time. Then, he let out a long sigh and looked very dejected. Taimur was indeed much better to his soldiers than Bagan. The latter treated these people as chess pieces in his hand while he treated them as his brothers. It was because he treated these people as his brothers that he carefully observed them. This led to the conclusion that the encirclement was very tight. At the very least, with his eyesight, he did not see any obvious gaps. If he really tried to force his way through, he was afraid that he would suffer great losses. The idea of forcefully breaking out of the encirclement was denied. Considering that the 5-star army was able to appear here without anyone asking, the Nuzan cavalry must have been wiped out. The cavalry that entered the town should be the 5-star army. An army that could defeat the Nuzan cavalry. There was no need to think about how strong they were. With such a strong army in front of them, it seemed that there was no other choice but to surrender. In just a short moment, Taimur's mind was filled with many thoughts. Then, as if he had made a decision, he suddenly turned around to look at Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse behind him, and asked, "Sixth young master, right? But I wonder if my brothers will be in danger if they surrender? If they will die sooner or later, why not fight now? At least they will die like men." Taimur had no intention of hiding his thoughts. He asked directly. At this moment, he seemed to have disregarded life and death. At this moment, he had forgotten the fact that Bagan's left arm had been chopped off when he tried to bargain with them. Taimur might have forgotten, but Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, did not. He coldly snorted and raised the ghost head blade in his hand. It seemed that he was going to teach the other party a lesson. At the very least, he had to chop off an arm. Wait. When the ghost head blade was raised high and ready to fall at any time, a voice that was not very loud rang out. It was this voice that shocked Beta Persei like a sudden clap of thunder,
causing the ghost head blade that was about to fall to the ground to stop abruptly in mid-air. After stopping Beta Persei from chopping people, Yang Chendong looked at Taimur and replied in a very serious tone. Since we are asking for their surrender, of course we won't kill them. Otherwise, why would we need to do this? As long as they are talented, they will be treated even better. Now, are you relieved? Good. The Han people have a saying that a gentleman keeps his promise. I'm relieved. After Taimur seriously sized up Yang Chendong, he turned around and shouted to his brothers in the camp, if everyone believes me, then surrender. As long as you don't cause trouble, they won't kill anyone. It was a simple question, but it also seemed to be a guarantee. But after thinking about it carefully, there was no guarantee. However, even though it was that simple, when this voice traveled into the military camp, many of the Mongolian cavalrymen first looked at each other. After a moment of hesitation, some of them threw the sabers in their hands to the ground and leaped onto their horses, leading them to the exit of the military camp.
Chapter 651. After the first person surrendered, the second and third quickly followed.
Following that, batches of Mongolian cavalrymen threw down their weapons and dismounted from their horses to surrender.
After all, it was a team of more than 2,000 people. Even if they came out one by one to surrender, it would still take some time. After more than 2 hours, the surrender ceremony finally came to an end. At that moment, there were still about 100 men on horseback in the military camp. They were still standing there and did not seem to be moved by Taimur's words. More than 2,300 men had already surrendered. This was enough to prove Taimur's position in the eyes of these cavalrymen. It made Yang Chendong see him in a new light. He was very satisfied with this number.
As for the remaining 100 men, based on his perverted memory, most of them were the cavalrymen who had supported Bagan earlier.
He did not know what they were thinking, but they did not surrender immediately. However, that was not important. Only by doing things one step at a time could one achieve success.
Similarly, when dealing with soldiers, one had to use both the carrot and the stick to better control the hearts of the soldiers.
Now, it seemed like it was time for them to show their strong and domineering side. First and second guards, get ready. Raise your guns and fire. He was still riding on the white dragon horse. When the breeze blew, his red robe fluttered gently. Following that was Yang Chendong's calm and normal voice. The two captains, Qiu Vi and Dao Shao, tensed up the moment they were called by Yang Chendong. When they heard the order to raise their guns, their bodies could not help but cooperate. As they typed, their guns shot out beams of light and flames. Pa-pa-pa. Pa-pa-pa. Before many people were ready and did not know what was going on, gunshots rang out.
What entered their eyes was the scene of the Mongolian cavalrymen in the military camp falling from their horses with blood splattered all over their bodies. In the eyes of the 60 guards, there were only a little over 100 men.
It did not even reach the number of enemies in one wave. When they finished off the enemy, some of the guards who were slow to react only fired one shot. They did not even have the chance to fire a second shot before everything was over. There was not a single enemy left alive in the field. More than 100 people died just like that under the not-so-dense gunfire. They didn't even have the time to react. They didn't even have the time to raise their swords, let alone dodge. There were more than 100 cavalrymen. If they were to carry out a mission, it would only take them 2 hours to slaughter a village of 500 to 600 people. But now, from the beginning to the end, all of them had died in the blink of an eye. This result shocked everyone.
Not only were the 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen who had just surrendered, but there were also the 3,000 Nuzan cavalrymen and 1,000 wind-chasing group cavalrymen who were watching from the side. Even though some of them had seen the power of firearms before, what happened this time still refreshed their understanding of firearms and their respect for them from the bottom of their hearts. As a result, when some people looked at Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden cloak, their expressions became much more solemn. They couldn't tell if it was fear, terror, respect, or worship. With the death of more than 100 people, the work of recruiting the surrendered cavalrymen was over. The next step was to count the number of people and resources. These were naturally done by professionals. Yang Chendong took advantage of this time to turn around and walk around Narcissus town. It was only a morning. To normal people, it was only a few hours, but to the people of Narcissus town, it was an earth-shattering change. This was because the 2 cavalrymen that were stationed here had fallen, and were replaced by an army called the Five-Star Army. No one would be able to avoid panic if they were suddenly led and ruled by a different person. Some cautious merchants stopped setting up their stalls and turned around to enter their houses. They locked their doors from the inside out as if doing so would make them safer. The number of people on the streets suddenly decreased by a lot. At least 70% of the merchants in the market were gone. Only a few brave ones or those who were forced to make a living were still there. It was impossible to say that they weren't afraid, but what was the use of being afraid? Was it a blessing or a curse? Yang Qindong naturally noticed the changes on the streets, but he didn't say anything.
On the other hand, Tiger's Mane, who was following beside him, said anxiously, "Young master, I'll get the soldiers to call the people out to welcome the young master."
In Tiger's Mane's heart, Yang Qindong was heaven and earth. When heaven and earth appeared, naturally, the people would line the streets to welcome it.
What was going on now that they were all hiding and disturbing the young master's elegance?
Could these people bear the consequences? After following him for so long, how could Tiger's Mane's thoughts escape Yang Qindong's eyes? He smiled and shook his head. There's no need for that. The people don't come out because they don't understand us. Once they know our policies, they'll come out on their own. For now, let's go to the market and see if there's anything new. With a face full of confidence, Yang Qindong stopped Tiger's Mane from using military means to call for people. He walked casually and headed towards the market in the town.
In an environment where the Beiming army was everywhere, there was an independent town that didn't obey the rules and had a population of more than 50,000.
All of this attracted Yang Qindong's attention. He wanted to see what was the reason for this. Yang Qindong's group didn't move quickly, but they still arrived at the market after a quarter of an hour.
Although it was called a market, it was actually the center of the town, a crossroad.
Because the location here was very good, it was not far from any place in the town. Slowly, a certain flow of people formed here. Slowly, the embryonic form of a market was formed, and it became the most prosperous place in the town. Not knowing what the Five-Star Army was going to do next, many merchants fled back to their houses in fear. If it wasn't for the fact that the roads leading to the outside of the town were blocked, who knows how many people would have fled with their families. But after all, it was a town with a population of 50,000. It could be called a small city anywhere. With such a large population, even if 70% of the merchants had left, this place was still very lively compared to other places. When Yang Qindong and his group appeared here, they naturally attracted everyone's attention, and when he looked back, those people turned their heads away one after another, as if they had never seen him before. The people were just curious and didn't have any intention to target him. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei naturally couldn't blame them. In addition, the young master seemed to be very curious about this place. He had already walked to a stall and chatted with a merchant there, so they didn't dare to disturb him. The stall that Yang Qindong walked to was specialized in selling warhorse pedals. There were 2 of them on the table, and one of them was somewhat damaged. The traces of repair were very obvious. The stall owner was a dark-skinned middle-aged man in his 30s. When he saw Yang Qindong walking towards him, it was obvious that his body trembled, but he quickly calmed down. Although his breathing was still heavy, he was already doing well. Horse pedals. Yang Qindong walked to the stall, glanced at the stall that was only about half a meter long, then looked at the things placed on it and asked aloud, "Yes, General." The middle-aged man cupped his fist, his expression extremely dignified and serious. Of course, whether this was because he was nervous or because he was used to dealing with people like this, only he himself knew. "You also know how to repair horse pedals?" Yang Qindong asked again, then picked up the horse pedals with serious repair marks. After looking at it carefully, he nodded. "Not bad, your craftsmanship is very exquisite." After being praised and talking about his profession, the middle-aged man's nervousness subsided a lot. A smile appeared on his face and he even said with a proud tone, "Of course, General, you can go and ask around. Who doesn't know about my Wuxia's skills? The horse pedals that I repair are no different from new ones. They are the most durable." "Well, it looks good." Yang Qindong's interest was piqued. He casually sat down on a wooden stool in front of the stall. Then, he fished out a pack of cigarettes with the word "War God" written on it from his bosom. He took out 2 cigarettes, one in his mouth, and the other in front of Wuxia. Cigarettes were manufactured by Yang Qindong during the New Year in Crimson City.
Earlier, he arranged for people to plant a certain amount of tobacco on the land in Qian City, then took out the finished products from the warehouse and provided some methods to make cigarettes. In the end, the first batch of artificial cigarettes was produced. Although the quality was not as good as the machine-made cigarettes in the future, the taste was not bad. In the previous life, Yang Dong would play any role in order to complete all kinds of missions. Smoking was a common occurrence, but he was not addicted to it. Later on, when he entered the logistics line due to injury, he picked up this habit again. This time, after the production was finally completed, he habitually carried cigarettes with him. Although he would not always take them out to smoke, occasionally when he was thinking about something, it still felt good to take one out. Of course, at this time, cigarettes had become another weapon produced by Qian City. Just like the Cuban cigars in the future, the price was expensive and could be considered a luxury item. But no matter the price, once this thing appeared, it became a hot commodity. As more and more people smoked it, they felt that it was very good and trustworthy. The sales of this thing would continue to increase. Just this alone could bring about an enviable profit. Chapter 652. Let's get back to business. Wu Hua watched Yang Chendong smoke a cigarette and handed him one. After a slight hesitation, he reached out and took it. Then, he lit the cigarette with a match and took a puff like Yang Chendong. Perhaps because he used too much force, he, who had never smoked a cigarette before, involuntarily coughed violently. Then his face turned red. "Old Wu, are you okay? Brother Wu, how are you?" Some of the stalls nearby had been paying attention to the situation here. When they saw Wu Hua's uncomfortable appearance, several people asked with concern. From this point alone, Wu Hua's popularity was still very good. "He's fine. He just smoked a little too much. His throat is a little uncomfortable. Hee. Yang Chendong answered for Wu Hua, then looked at Wu Hua with a smile and said, "Smoking is not like you. You have to take it a little bit and smoke slowly to enjoy the feeling. Of course, smoking too much of this thing is not good for the body." After a few loud coughs, Wu Hua, who had already adapted, followed Yang Chendong and took a puff gently. Then, he closed his mouth and exhaled 2 puffs of smoke from his nose. He laughed. "Well, this thing is good. It's a bit strong and interesting. It's something that belongs to men. Ha ha ha." Listening to Wu Hua's evaluation, Yang Chendong laughed. Cigarettes were just one of the means he came up with to make money. In the future, he would also have a cigarette monopoly. Just this alone, he was afraid that the annual profit would not be small. As for whether it was something that belonged to men, he really did not think about it. After all, many women in the future would smoke. Although the proportion was not high, at least it proved that it should not be used by men. With cigarettes as a bridge, Wu Hua wasn't as restrained in front of Yang Chendong as before. When the two chatted, they were like old friends. They didn't hide anything from each other, but as long as it wasn't a secret, they could share it together. This was probably where the charm of cigarettes lay. It could allow 2 strangers to quickly get closer to each other. With the help of the cigarette, Yang Chendong found out. Wu Hua was a native of the Great Ming Dynasty. His ancestors had served as soldiers in Nuer's Department of Personnel, so he was a standard soldier. However, it was too tiring to be a military carver in the Great Ming Dynasty. Regardless of whether you were suitable or not, a boy born from a military family would be a soldier from the moment he was born. Unless the girl had outstanding looks, she would most likely be married into a military family. It was as if he was unwilling to accept this fate. After scheming for a long time, Wu Hua's father escaped from the city guard institution and came to Narcissus town. He gave birth to Wu Hua there, and the old man was no longer alive. Wu Hua was already 32 years old and had gotten used to the life here. Oh. Did Water Immortal Town exist more than 30 years ago? Yang Chendong asked with interest. Yes, it was here more than 30 years ago, but it wasn't called a town back then. It was called Narcissus Village. Because it was close to the Songhua River, people could make a living by fishing in the summer. There were also many large forests nearby, so they could mainly hunt in the winter. As long as people weren't lazy, they could survive. More and more people came here. With a cigarette, Wu Hua seemed to have become a chatterbox. He would answer whatever Yang Chendong asked. He was also very talkative and said things that Yang Chendong didn't have the time to ask, but he wanted to know more. For example, Yang Qindong understood the drawbacks of being a soldier. Regardless of whether you were willing or not, your birth represented everything. Wu Hua's father was born with a passion for blacksmithing, but he didn't become a craftsman. Instead, he became a soldier. As a result, Wu Hua inherited this trait of his father's and started working as a mechanic. For example, the various city guard institutions in New Er's city guard institution were already being paid without paying. In fact, some of the city guard institutions didn't have that many soldiers. In order to get more money from the imperial court, the generals deliberately came up with this method. For example, Narcissus Town was very poor. It was so poor that many people couldn't even fill their stomachs. The most common food on the table was fish soup, but people would get sick of eating it every day. Moreover, after so many years, it was impossible to fish by the river for a good harvest. One had to go deep into the river, and that required a certain level of skill. For example, there were still many young people in Narcissus Town. Due to the pressure, many of them had been practicing martial arts and horsemanship since they were young. They were afraid that one day, someone would threaten them. That way, they wouldn't need to kill the enemy, but at least they could protect themselves. For example, after chatting with Wu Hua for more than 2 hours, some of the small merchants in the surrounding area gathered their courage and joined them. Yang Qindong had to pay the price by giving each person a cigarette. Many of the people who were curious before had their cravings. From these people, Narcissus Town became more three-dimensional. Yang Qindong finally understood why a town of 50,000 people could survive the Beiming army's encirclement and remain unscathed. There was only one reason. They were too poor. They were so poor that even the Beiming army wouldn't come here to harvest grain. They were so poor that most of the young men who were born here couldn't find wives from other places. They were so poor that they would work for others as long as they were given some money. They were so poor that there were benefits to being poor. At least, that was how Yang Qindong saw it in his heart. Because he was poor, it was easier and more convenient to persuade some useful people to work for him. Because he was poor, he only needed to pay a small price to do a lot of things. He also asked Wu Hua about the opinions of the townspeople towards the Nuzan cavalry and the Mongol cavalry. Wu Hua was in charge of speaking, and the others added on. They talked about the two cavalry units. Regardless of whether it was the Nuzan cavalry or the Mongol cavalry, they weren't really made up of Nuzan and Mongol people. Many of them were originally from Narcissus Town. Because of that, they rarely bullied the townspeople because they wouldn't be supported by the cavalry. It was also because both sides had local civilians joining in that even though the Nuzan cavalry were strong, they did not really fight with the weaker Mongol cavalry. After all, the soldiers below were all their own people and many of them grew up together. If they were to let them fight amongst themselves, the effect would not be too good. Although they couldn't bully the townspeople openly, the two cavalry units had done a lot of things to oppress the townspeople in secret. For example, the salary of a cavalry unit wasn't very high, and it was only enough to fill their stomachs. For example, Wu Hua and the other small merchants who relied on their craftsmanship to make a living still had to pay taxes every year. The public explanation was that it was a protection fee that they collected to protect Narcissus Town from being bullied by the northern Ming guards and the nearby bandits. Yes, it wasn't a lot of money. However, to Wu Hua and the others who lived at the bottom of society, even a coin of money was still money. It could save their lives in a critical moment. The more Yang Qindong listened, the brighter his eyes became. From what he understood, he already had a rough plan in his heart. Once it was done, his military strength here would rise to a whole new level. Everyone talked about a lot of things, and Yang Qindong only left the market when it was almost night time. Out of gratitude, everyone who chatted with him today received a piece of fat meat and 5 taels of silver. That was a big piece of fat meat that weighed at least 3 catties, and 5 taels of silver. They could save it for when they went to the nearby Beiming towns to buy what they needed. This made Wu Hua and the others extremely touched. However, something even more shocking happened after dinner that night. Most of the townspeople had the guts to go out for a walk because they realized that the 5-star army was easy to talk to. At least, they didn't threaten the safety of the townspeople. They didn't even say anything harsh, which made them feel more at ease. It was the 5-star army that was in charge of patrolling the streets that night. They spread the news that there would be a public trial in the town's largest square the next morning. They would judge the past of the Nuzan cavalry and the Mongol cavalry. If they were guilty of any wrongdoings, they would be judged and executed on the spot to give the townspeople justice.
The news spread like a gust of wind into the ears of the townspeople who were walking on the streets.
Then, through their mouths, it spread to the townspeople's homes. According to the 5-star army, they hoped that the townspeople would be able to attend the public trial tomorrow morning. Those who were wronged could seek redress on the spot, and those who weren't wronged could also go and watch the show. Because of this news, Narcissus Town, which had a population of 50,000, instantly became lively. Many of the townspeople didn't go out for a walk and went home early to rest so that they could wake up early the next morning and grab a good spot in the square to take a good look at what this public trial was all about. Was it really as the news said? Would they be able to make a decision for them and compensate them? Yes, it was compensation. The news said that if anyone was bullied before, as long as they could prove it, the 5-star army would compensate them with silver from the Nuzan cavalry and the Mongol cavalry's warehouses. Of course, if someone wanted to falsely claim the money, it would be the same as committing a crime and they would be severely punished. How many people who lived in Narcissus Town hadn't been exploited and oppressed before?
This was closely related to everyone, so naturally, there were many people who were concerned about it.
As for falsely claiming the money, haha, they did think about it. However, when they found out that it was a serious crime, they gave up on the idea. The gunshots yesterday weren't firecrackers.
They heard that more than 100 people died.
It was murder, and blood flowed like a river. Were they tired of living and greedy for this kind of money? Under all kinds of thoughts, the sun slowly rose, and a new day had arrived. In the morning, many of the townspeople didn't even eat breakfast. They brought their things to the square and found a good spot to wait. The time was set at 9 in the morning. But in fact, before 8 o'clock, more than 30,000 people had gathered in the square.
In this way, except for the elderly and the young children, more than 80% of the people with independent ability had come out.
This could already achieve a great influence. Chapter 653. Yang Chendong listened to Tiger's Mane's report as he walked out of Borte's spacious house. Yang Chendong smiled when he heard that there were more than 30,000 people. Their first step was already so successful. As long as everything went smoothly, they would become stronger. At 9 o'clock in the morning, it was time for the trial. 5-star army soldiers wearing green uniforms started to appear around the square. Along with them were Yang Chendong and a group of high-ranking military officers wearing golden capes.
They walked to the front of the square and sat down in front of the row of tables and chairs that had been set up beforehand.
Beside them stood a group of guards and members of the Cold Front. They were wearing bulletproof vests and wielding the Type 95. Compared to the heavy armor that other armies wore to protect themselves, the mercenaries wore bulletproof vests that were invulnerable and looked much lighter than armor. These vests were replicas of the bulletproof vests in the warehouse. They were produced by the factory in Crimson City.
Legend had it that in order to ensure the quality and characteristics of the vests, they had spent tens of millions of taels of silver and countless manpower to develop them.
Even so, the cost of making a bulletproof vest was still very high.
Up until now, only the members of the Cold Front who had undergone strict training and tests were allowed to wear one.
Even the auxiliary soldiers were not allowed to wear one. It was just a piece of protective clothing. Just the research and development alone cost close to 10 million taels of silver. This was equivalent to 3 years of Northern Ming or Southern Ming's National Treasury's income. Just from this alone, one could see that Xianxia was extremely wealthy. Of course, the benefits of having these vests were self-explanatory. Unless the target was the eyes or mouth, it would be very difficult to hurt the Cold Front. This was because not only were they wearing bulletproof vests, but they were also wearing a helmet called Kevlar. Yang Chendong personally named it the Immortal Helmet. With the appearance of the undying helmets and bulletproof vests, the personal safety of the Cold Vanguard warriors was raised to a whole new level. It was easy to imagine how powerful and stunning they would be on the battlefield. After all, Narcissus Town had been ruled by the Jurchens and Mongolians for so long. No one could be sure that there were no extremists in the town. This highlighted the importance of the guards and the Cold Front, not to mention the existence of the 6th young master. His safety would always be Xianxia's #1 priority. It would not be too much to arrange for many people to appear on both sides. The residents of Narcissus Town naturally felt a chill down their spines when they saw the generals and the soldiers that appeared so majestic. Although these people looked calm and did not show any intention of threatening their safety, they still felt a natural chill in the air wherever they sat. This caused the citizens who were chattering non-stop to shut their mouths. And the place became quiet. Chen Bo, the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment who was ordered to host the meeting, saw this silence and was naturally very satisfied. Using this opportunity, he held a simple megaphone and shouted, "I hereby announce the start of the public trial. The first item is to fire a shot to salute the citizens of Narcissus Town who were murdered or wronged. May their souls be at peace after today's meeting. All musketeers, listen up. Fire 3 times. Fire. Bang, 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 bang." A company of cold front soldiers stood at the side of the square. After the order was given, they all raised their guns and fired at the sky. Their formation was extremely neat and uniform. It felt as if the 100 of them were one person. Not only were their movements orderly, but even the frequency and speed of their shots were the same. Although it was 100 people firing, when the sound reached the ears of the people in the square, the gunshots were very uniform. It was as if there were only 3 gunshots and everything was over. Wow! So powerful! So mighty! How did they do it? There are so many of them, but it feels as if they are one person. Is this the 5-star army? No wonder the awe-inspiring Nuzen cavalry and Mongol cavalry couldn't even last one round in front of them. With this kind of army, with this kind of military discipline, how can they not win a battle? Hey, you guys still don't know. This 5-star army is very powerful. They don't even put the Beiming guards in their eyes. Not long ago, they massacred more than 2,000 warhorses of the Jianghu left guards. Their slogan is to create the strongest cavalry in the world. I heard that as long as one can join them, they will receive the best treatment. Not only will their salary be the highest, but they will also receive the best food. In the future, each person will even be given 2 warhorses. The people in front sighed from the bottom of their hearts. Those who spoke at the back were those who were more attentive. If someone observed carefully, they would notice that Wu Hua, who was in charge of riding in the center of the town, was among them. Not only him, but there were also some people who specialized in selling all kinds of things and had some craftsmanship. Most of them were the people who chatted with Yang Chendong for most of the afternoon with Wu Hua. It was naturally not a coincidence that they appeared here. They were ordered by Yang Chendong to bewitch the people here. Their purpose was to spread the news that the 5-star army was recruiting people. Since there were 50,000 people here who were ownerless, and there were more than 8,000 young adults here, how could Yang Chendong give up such a good opportunity to expand his strength? This was the reason why Wu Hua and the others spread the news. As for whether they received benefits from Yang Chendong, and how much they received, only they knew. Oh, what kind of treatment is it? When someone spoke, there would naturally be people who asked. Some people were curious. As a result, all kinds of questions were naturally asked in various parts of the square. After the public trial, the 5-star army will set the recruitment standards. At that time, the treatment will be explained in detail. If you want to know more, go take a look. In any case, I will be there. As for now, let's continue watching the public trial. This was Wu Hua's voice. Although he had received some benefits and had to spread the news, he also knew what kind of situation this was. He would not let the guest take the lead. Thus, he only said that after the public trial, the 5-star army would have a recruitment notice. After that, he stopped talking and focused all of his attention on the center of the square. Wu Hua did not speak. In addition, the atmosphere was indeed very tense. Even if someone wanted to ask, it would not be good to say anything at this time. They could only suppress all kinds of thoughts in their hearts and watch the public trial first. After everything was over, they would go take a good look at the notice and see what was written on it. The center of the crowd quickly quieted down again. Among them, a man wearing a broken straw hat lowered his head and intentionally or unintentionally squeezed out of the crowd. Compared to everyone who wanted to get closer, it was very easy to retreat. He didn't even encounter any resistance. He left the crowd and then disappeared from the square. His actions were not noticed by the mercenaries who were in charge of security and security. There were more than 30,000 people here. It was simply too many. It was impossible to take care of everyone. After the man left the square, he first returned to a small courtyard. After making sure that no one was paying attention to him, he entered the house and came in front of a water jar that was only filled with a little water.
He stretched out his arm and gently moved it, revealing a passage on the ground. He jumped down and placed the water jar back on the ground. He also disappeared. After about half an hour, this person appeared 5 miles northwest of Narcissus town. At this moment, he finally regained his freedom and could finally throw the hat to the ground, revealing his true identity. He was one of the Nuzan cavalry generals who had quietly disappeared when he saw that the situation was not good. When Hui Libu saw that he did not recognize the cavalry that followed General Borte, he knew that things were not going well.
He left first and went into hiding. Things were just as he thought.
Borte and the others were indeed in trouble.
Thus, he had been hiding under the water tank at home. Occasionally, when he came out at night, he would move around a bit. That was how he found out about the public trial. Today, he had taken the risk to appear because he wanted to take advantage of the large number of people to inquire about some things. Defeat. This was already an irrefutable fact. However, he wanted to know how they were defeated. Who were their opponents? How strong were they? In order to find out, he risked his life to come out. After hearing what Wu Hua and the others said, he was satisfied with the answer. The 5-star army dared to go against the Baiming guards and stole more than 2,000 war horses. Just based on this, they were doomed. This was something that even the Nuzan and Mongol cavalry did not dare to do. He thought that he had found out a huge piece of information. After coming out of the tunnel, he identified the direction and headed towards the Saha River northwest of Narcissus town. That was the nearest Baiming 1,000 households. He wanted to inform them of the 5-star army's actions. After this incident, Baiming would definitely not let the 5-star army off. When 2 tigers fought, one was bound to be injured.
If he grasped the opportunity, it might be time for him to lead the Nuzan cavalry to rise again.
Hui Libu did not leave and left quietly. At this moment, the public trial was in full swing in the largest square of Narcissus town. The first rule of the public trial was to fire the gun. It was to show off one's strength and also to pay respect to the victims. At that time, people were very superstitious. They believed that a person's soul would remain after death. Those who died unjustly would not leave unless they took revenge.
Now that the gun was fired, it was equivalent to using this superstition to let the 5-star army take the rightful position.
Chapter 654. The second item was to collect the silver.
Following the capture of Borte, Bagan, and the other generals, the silver that was controlled by the Jurchen and Mongol cavalry had become one of the spoils of war. A lot of money was taken out from there. At this moment, the 5-star army brought them out and gathered them together in the square. Very quickly, a mountain of silver appeared in everyone's sight, shining with a silver light. Many people's eyes were filled with excitement and excitement. Due to Narcissus town's unique location and environment, the people here were all very poor. Sometimes, they couldn't even settle their meals, let alone have any savings at home. Now that so much silver was placed in front of everyone, it would be a lie to say that no one was moved. Especially when they knew that the silver would be given to the victims as compensation, some people's eyes lit up. No matter how good the words were, no matter how good the guarantees were, it was not as convincing as a mountain of silver.
For a moment, the entire square was filled with a restless mood.
If it wasn't for the fact that there was a company of fully armed cold spear warriors guarding the Silver Mountain, who knew how many people would have rushed up and snatched the Silver Mountain clean?
The appearance of the mountain of silver also stirred up everyone's emotions. At this moment, the public trial was proceeding as usual. The third item was to bring people to commit crimes. Borte and Hulu of the Jurchen tribe, as well as Bagan and Momuer of the Mongol cavalry, were brought to the square. There was already a wooden rack with names written on it. After these people appeared, they were tied to the wooden rack according to their names. Their hands were tied, and their heads drooped. Their bodies were not free at all, and they did not look like generals at all. This was especially true for General Bagan. His left arm had been chopped off due to his resistance, but the bleeding had stopped. However, due to the excessive loss of blood, his face was as pale as snow. Now that he saw the scene of the public trial, he was trembling all over, trembling uncontrollably. Not only him, but the other generals were not much better. Perhaps because they knew that they had bullied the good too many times and were about to receive retribution, they did not look too good. None of them dared to raise their heads, as if they were afraid that they would be targeted.
Only the Jurchen General Hulu and the Mongol General Teimu had their chests puffed out as they looked at the 30,000 people outside the square. They were all straightforward people who fought bravely and fiercely. They were the kind of people who didn't have too many schemes. Being able to become a general wasn't because of his eloquence or flattery. It was because he was strong enough that he was recognized by Borte and Bagan and was given a high position. Their personalities would not allow them to do anything that would harm or bully the people, so they were the most calm at this moment. But no matter what, they were generals of the two armies. Even with their high positions, they could not escape responsibility. Even though they looked calm, they were already dead. After all, according to what they knew, how many defeated generals would have a good ending? In fact, the generals were not the only ones who did not know what was going on. Even the 30,000 people who came did not know what was going on. They only thought that it was like an execution at the market. Since they were the defeated army's generals, they would definitely die. Only when political commissar Chen Bo stood up and began to read the process of the public trial did everyone know. The public trial meant that the people would judge the evildoers together. As for whether the kidnapped people were guilty or not, it would be up to the people to decide. When Chen Bo conveyed the meaning of the public trial through the loudspeaker, the square became even more lively. All along, the people were made up of the lowest class of people. Under normal circumstances, they were the people who were exploited, used and suffered. If there was something good, it would rarely have anything to do with them. On the other hand, if there was a need to put in effort or risk their lives, it would naturally be their turn. This might seem very unfair, but this was the norm in a feudal society. For thousands of years, the people had become accustomed to it. On the contrary, there would occasionally be one or two officials who would plead for the people. They would be seen as honest officials, and things like giving people umbrellas and so on would happen again and again. Thinking about it, it was sad. The officials only did what they should do, and the people would be so grateful. It had to be said that this was the world's biggest joke. The people were used to listening to others, used to being oppressed by others. Suddenly they could make decisions. This made them feel uncomfortable. A group of people huddled together and chattered. They did not dare to believe and did not dare to believe. Chen Bo had already expected such a scene. Seeing this, he could not help but envy the people of Qian City. Compared to them, the people there not only had a higher quality of life, but they also had more human rights. Once they encountered injustice, they could respond step by step and finally be dealt with properly. Although it was said that there were no absolutes in the world, and not everyone could obtain the ideal outcome when encountering injustice, but most people still received the respect of human rights. At the very least, if there was a public trial in Qian City, the people there would not be so agitated. They would even take it for granted. This was the difference. And this small difference, who knew how many years it would take for others to catch up, before they could truly accept it and change their mindset. After being distracted for a moment, Chen Bo's gaze returned to the 30,000 people in front of him. Using the loudspeaker, he shouted, "Could it be that none of you have been oppressed or bullied? As long as you can provide the corresponding evidence or find a witness, then we will make the decision for you. Do you see that mountain of silver? As long as what you say is the truth, the silver there will become compensation and fall into your hands. Now, I invite those who have been wronged to step forward and tell our staff about the injustice that happened to you. Believe in us, believe in yourselves. Justice is in the hearts of the people." In any case, Chen Bo was the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment. During this period, he had read many books and learned many things. Now that it was finally time to put it to good use, he immediately used his glib tongue and tried his best to bewitch the people with words. He firmly believed that as long as one person was persuaded and dared to step forward, there would be tens of thousands of people who would step forward. In reality, there was no need for Chen Bo to say too much. Wu Hua and the others had already stepped forward. They were a step ahead of everyone else and knew what was going on with this public trial. Under the circumstances where they had communicated beforehand, they walked out of the crowd and walked over to the row of mercenaries who had set up the tables at the side of the plaza. "I want to report. I'm talking about the Jurchen Borte. My family has an ancestral jade pendant. It was accidentally seen by him and was forcibly taken away. That pendant should still be on his waist now. I want to report that the Mongolian Bagan once took a fancy to my horse and only offered 5 taels of silver. I refused and was beaten up by him. Now, that horse is still in the Mongolian camp stable.
I want to report that Borte had bad intentions towards my wife. One time, when I was out hunting, he did something inhumane. In order to protect her chastity, my wife bit her tongue and died on the spot. I didn't dare to tell anyone about my return, but this matter has been in my heart for many years. If I don't take revenge, I really don't have the face to see my wife in the afterlife. Now, I want the 5-star army to make a decision for me. Everyone in the neighborhood knows about this matter. Please make a decision for me. I want to report. With the first person to step forward as an example, more and more people took the initiative to step forward. They each spoke of the various grievances they had suffered, each with evidence or witnesses. Every time someone came forward to report, the mercenaries would constantly record it on paper. The auxiliary soldiers who followed them would immediately investigate and try to get to the bottom of the matter. For example, the jade pendant was indeed found on Borte's body, so it naturally had to be returned to its rightful owner. The horse with the same characteristics was also found in the stable and returned to its rightful owner. As for the deceased wife, she couldn't be found, so they took out 20 taels of silver from the silver mountain. Although the amount wasn't much, it was enough to build a new grave and even hang a chastity memorial arch. As more and more people came forward to report, the crimes of Borte, Bagan, and the others were reported to the world one by one. More and more people came forward to report. On the other hand, Hu Lu and Te Mu were rarely prosecuted. Although there were some people who came forward to say that the two of them had done something wrong, there was insufficient evidence after investigation. There was even one who was clearly falsely accusing them and wanted to take the opportunity to gain benefits. After being investigated, the commoner was severely warned by the mercenaries. When the forest was big, there were all kinds of birds. Although the commoners were at the bottom of the social ladder, there were still some who wanted to use this opportunity to make a fortune. Yang Qindong had already thought of this. Once such people were discovered, it was natural for him to give them a warning. If it wasn't for the fact that these people weren't under his rule, they would have been punished for their actions. The public hearing went smoothly. Most of the commoners who came forward to sue had evidence and reason. Plus, the incident happened in Narcissus town, so the investigation wasn't too complicated. Even so, it still took them 3 days to finish listening to all the pleadings of the citizens. This was because there were more than 100 staff members in charge of reception, and 4 battalions of auxiliary soldiers working together. Otherwise, it would have taken even longer. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.